Chapter 559. Rinpoche and the Empress returned to Dayo before the two idiots returned. On the way back, Rinpoche was still thinking about how the two idiots managed to become guests of honor at Fatso's place. In addition, they ran a red light on a horse, injured the police officers, beat up everything that couldn't be beaten, smashed baths, and destroyed prostitution dens. The experiences of these two people were really colorful. He had already prepared the wine and was waiting to hear the story. Don't think about it. Go back and pacify the rebels. I'm going back to Lan City. I miss it a little, the Empress said. Rinpoche held the Empress's hand with one hand and supported a pile of boxes with the other. There were still flash bombs and hand grenades inside. Stun grenades were much more powerful than hand grenades when used properly. The scene in front of them instantly changed and appeared in a room in Dayo. The sound of wind and rain reached their ears. Rinpoche walked to the window and opened it to take a look outside. The sky was gloomy and bean-sized raindrops were falling. I don't know if it's raining in Yoshin City as well. I'm afraid that the commoners won't be able to withstand such heavy rain. We should mobilize the doctors and medicinal ingredients in the city to send them over, Rinpoche said. After encountering a disaster and escaping from the city, they were terrified. If they were to encounter such heavy rain, many people would fall ill. You make the arrangements. The Empress held a dog-shaped robot in her hand. It was specially sent over by Jiaohan the next day. It didn't have many functions, but it was much better than the ones on the market that cost hundreds or thousands. Such a robot dog cost tens of thousands of yuan. It would run around its home, groan when it sensed the Empress's touch, gnaw on furniture, eat shoes, and bite curtains. Rinpoche always felt that the function of this robot dog was very mysterious. How much hatred would one have for someone to give this to? Wasn't this a robot version of a husky? However, the Empress quite liked it. When she saw that the robot dog was about to bite a chair leg, she put her finger into its mouth. The robot dog immediately let out a whine, turned a few rounds on the spot, and began to do somersaults on the ground. Rinpoche thought for a while. Could it be that the Empress liked huskies? He could give her a nest of them, and then the palace would no longer be peaceful. Imagine a bunch of huskies letting loose in the palace. I didn't even send an umbrella over, Rinpoche mumbled as he walked around the room. Let's wait. The Empress gave the robotic husky a kick, walked behind Rinpoche, rested her chin on his shoulder, and looked out of the window. Rinpoche felt two soft points pressing against his back. He turned his hands around and tried to wrap them around the Empress's waist. However, the Empress grabbed his hands and raised them to both sides like a cross. Or rather, Jack and Ruth at the bow of the Titanic. However, there was only a drain outside the window. If they wanted to jump, they could only jump into the drain. Your Majesty, this isn't fair. He turned his head, and the skin at the corner of his eye touched the Empress's forehead. Since when did you learn to say the word fair? The Empress moved her nose close to his ear, and her hot breath blew on the base of Rinpoche's ear. Remember, the strong don't need to be fair. Rinpoche deeply agreed with what the Empress said. From a personal point of view, fairness was something the weak would say when seeking to change their situation. The strong didn't need to be fair. However, from the country's point of view, there needs to be fairness. Otherwise, the country will fall into chaos. This is the reason why the emperor should be punished like the commoners. Who punished me? The Empress asked in a clear voice. Your Majesty is always right. If you have any doubts, please refer to the previous sentence. Rinpoche laughed. The Empress smiled as she rested her head on Rinpoche's shoulder. The two of them stood quietly in front of the window for a long time before seeing Qing Yuan come over with an umbrella to check if they had returned. The rain was heavy, and the umbrella was for one person. Qing Yuan's clothes were mostly wet and stuck to her body. The Empress let go of Rinpoche, took a few steps back, and jumped on the robotic husky with her toes. She immediately fell into her arms. Thank you, Miss Qing Yuan. Rinpoche opened the door and took the umbrella from Qing Yuan. He waved at the Empress and said, Your Majesty, I got someone to send an umbrella over. This umbrella can't withstand such a heavy rain, and I'm afraid that it will wet your clothes. After taking a few steps, he felt the raindrops hit his body along with the wind. After leaving the courtyard, Rinpoche found a guard to bring an umbrella to the Empress. He went to the courtyard where Wang Baobao was locked up and saw that fool squatting under the eaves watching ants move. He didn't care that his body was wet, and his thin clothes stuck to his body, outlining his bud-like figure. To put it simply, she was as flat as Lin Xiaola, with no breasts, no butt, and nothing to look at. When Rinpoche returned to his courtyard, he saw Zhuo Lung standing outside with an umbrella and a sword in his other hand, blocking the raindrops brought in by the wind. "Sir," when Zhuo Lung saw Rinpoche, he immediately kept his sword, and his body began to be wet from the raindrops. "What's the matter?" Rinpoche asked. "There's news from whose city," Zhuo Lung said. "Come in and talk." Rinpoche brought Zhuo Lung into the house and asked him to wait for a while. He went to the back hall to change his clothes before coming out. "What's the situation?" Rinpoche asked. Previously in Yoshin City, he specially asked about whose city, but there wasn't any news from him. He thought that whose city had died in the chaos or in the fire. After all, whose city wasn't very strong and was only at the advanced level of the manual level. This kind of strength was considered pretty good during normal times, but he basically didn't have the ability to protect himself in a war. Rinpoche didn't expect him to actually be alive. "I received the secret letter a day ago. Xiaokuan and Rao Yu have met up, and they are going to escape." Zhuo Lung took out a secret letter and handed it over with both hands. Rinpoche took it and read it carefully. According to the letter, he escaped from the city that day and mixed with an army hidden outside. Under Xiaokuan's lead, they passed through the mountains and forests, and it took them a few days to finally reach Chun City and meet up with Rao Yu. This army was the defeated army that Xiaokuan had brought with him, and it had a total of 50,000 soldiers. In addition, there were the elephant, monkey, and insect soldiers of the Six Doors. Rinpoche finally found out the number of elephant soldiers of the Six Doors, which was close to 300. He had to admit that this was a pretty good combat power. However, the soldiers were in a state of panic, and there were many deserters. There were about 45,000 soldiers left. After meeting up with Rao Yu, there were another 150,000 soldiers. However, both sides didn't dare to confront the aboriginals in Chun City and were preparing to retreat to the south. There were only 3 reasons. The first was that they hoped that the aboriginals would divide their forces and occupy the various cities, but this possibility was slim. Before the situation was completely pacified, it was impossible to divide their forces and give the aboriginals an opportunity to take advantage of them. The second reason was to lengthen the aboriginal supply line. After all, the aboriginals ate a lot of food. Even if they were resupplied from the various cities, the supply line would be extended, and the aboriginals' target was the supply line. There was a possibility, but it wasn't very likely. This was because if they were forced into a corner, the aboriginals would confiscate the food that passed through the cities and not leave any rations for the people in the cities. This would force some people to rebel, but it would be too late. Before these people could grow up, Xiaokuan and Rao, you would probably be eliminated. The last possibility was that they had a favorable location in the south, and they wanted to wait for the aboriginals there for the final battle. "What do you think?" Rinpoche looked up and asked. "Their target should be to Yunza." Zhuo Lung immediately voiced out his thoughts. "What's that place?" "The lair of the Six Doors is nearby, and to Yunza is a swamp. It's said that it's very dangerous. Less than 30% of the people who go in can come out alive, and most of them die inside. It seems like it's here." Rinpoche knew that he had guessed correctly. The Six Doors should know this place very well and know which places were dangerous and which were safe. If the aboriginals rashly went in, they would probably suffer great losses. If they didn't go in, they couldn't possibly keep waiting outside, right? Wait until they ran out of food and starved to death. At this thought, Rinpoche got up and went out to look for the Empress. He told her about the secret letter and his conjecture. "Your Majesty, I suggest that General Gong and the winged cavalry immediately set off to intercept them. We can't let them enter to Yunza. At the same time, Protector General Shi Deputy Protector General Zong, Captain Qing, and Lin Shaola will also go together. The other party has 3 strange beasts and 6 spirit wheel experts. I'm afraid that Protector General Shi and the others won't be a match for them. Chapter 560. 10 days later, the sun shone down on the earth. People who were exposed to the outside would be drenched in sweat after a short while. The Empress, Shi Wanya, Zhong Shun, Qing Ping, Gong Zheng, Ren Baqian, and many winged cavalry warriors were waiting in the forest halfway up a hillside. It's too hot. It's either a heavy rain or a scorching sun. Ren Baqian moaned as he enjoyed the coolness of the shade of the trees. After 10 days of relentless pursuit, he had finally caught up to the rebel army. However, even though he had returned to Earth twice in the past 10 days, he had almost lost a layer of skin. As soon as he entered the forest, he fell to the ground and refused to get up. Sir Ren's body still needs to be trained, Shi Wanya said faintly. Apart from him, the others were basically unaffected. Yes, I haven't trained you for a long time, and you have been slacking off. This time, I will start training twice as much every day when I go back, the Empress said thoughtfully. Ren Baqian widened his eyes and looked at Shi Wanya before looking at the Empress. Who did he offend? A group of Cardinal Heaven bigwigs like you can't even compare to ordinary spirit wheel experts. I'm only a man wheel expert, man wheel level. How can we compare to you? Your Majesty, wait until I'm Master Li Fu's godly spear before training, Ren Baqian said innocently. You can't use your spirit before you reach the spirit wheel level. You won't be able to learn it, the Empress said faintly. Your Majesty, I have such an amazing physique, a rare talent that only appears once in 100 years. I can definitely do it. Ren Baqian sat up from the ground and vowed. The Empress snorted softly. She couldn't be bothered with him. She placed a robot husky beside her feet and stroked its head. The robot husky didn't even run 2 steps before it tumbled to the ground. In a flash, Qing Ping grabbed the robot husky and placed it beside the Empress. Only then did he exclaim in admiration, "This thing is rather interesting. The person who made this thing is really amazing. An inanimate object can actually act like it's alive." Then, in a flash, the Empress shot Ren Baqian into a tree. The tree, which was wide enough for a person to wrap his arms around it, was broken and fell to the other side. Before anyone could react, Ren Baqian looked down and saw that the robot husky had been grabbed by Qing Ping's big hand, and its entire head was out of shape. The fact that the Empress had brought it along with her all the way showed how much she liked it. Now that it had been destroyed by Qing Ping, he was already being merciful by only shooting him into the tree. Captain Qing, your grip is too strong. Ren Baqian laughed as he pointed at the robot dog. Qing Ping crawled up from the ground and took a look, apologizing profusely. The Empress picked up the robot dog and pinched it. The robot dog was like plasticine in the Empress's hand. The areas that were dented immediately bulged up, and the areas that were originally fine were dented. After the Empress squeezed a few times, the robot husky's head was already beyond recognition. It was completely dead. Your Majesty, I'll go back and buy you 2 better ones. Ren Baqian smiled bitterly. Only then did the Empress stop whipping the corpse. She reluctantly slapped a hole in the ground and buried the mechanical dog in it. This was to prevent its corpse from being exposed to the wilderness. Remember, I want 2. The Empress raised her head and said to him after she was done. Everyone waited in the forest for a long time before the Baihu, who had been sent out to scout, came back to report, Your Majesty, my lords, the rebel army is still 2 hours away. Continue investigating. Ren Baqian waved his hand. I'll go and take a look as well. Qing Ping stood up and said, there were still many experts in the rebel army, and if they were discovered, they wouldn't be able to return. Having an expert overseeing would always make people feel more at ease. Thank you. Ren Baqian cupped his hands. He turned to look at Lin Shaola, who was sleeping soundly on a rock nearby. The light that shone through the branches and leaves seemed to have been shattered and scattered on her body. 150,000 people. As long as one person kills 200 of them, It'll be a piece of cake. Gong Zheng counted with his fingers and didn't get it wrong. Ren Baqian wanted to give Gong Zheng a thumbs up for his mathematical skills. It's not like there are 200 He Langjun, Ren Baqian casually said. The wild boars in this world were called He Langjun. It was easy for one-winged cavalry warrior to deal with 200 ordinary people. However, 700 winged cavalry warriors would inevitably suffer losses when facing 150,000 soldiers. Quantitative change could lead to qualitative change. 200 He Langjun are really not to be trifled with. Gong Zheng laughed. Those fellows were 3 to 4 meters tall, weighed a few tons, and had coarse skin and thick flesh. They were indeed not to be trifled with. The enemy's elephant soldiers are not to be trifled with either, Ren Baqian said. With Sir Ren's things, it won't be a problem. Gong Zheng slapped his thighs and laughed. He then turned to the people below and shouted, "Check everyone and make the best use of the remaining time to rest." Ren Baqian thought about it and felt that there shouldn't be any problems with 8 grenades and 2 flash bombs per person. When throwing the grenades, you must split up. Don't throw them all at once. It's too wasteful. Ren Baqian couldn't help but say, "Understood." In a while, the winged cavalry will be divided into 7 teams with 100 people each. They will attack from 7 positions at the same time and break up the enemy's marching formation. The main target this time is the leader of the rebel army. As long as we find him, Shi Wanya and Zongshan will be responsible for taking his head. If an expert appears, I will naturally take action. After that, the enemy will disperse. Then, we will clean up the periphery and tear apart their flesh bit by bit. There's no need to fight recklessly. In particular, if we encounter a large group of defeated soldiers, we must retreat after one attack and move around the periphery. When there's an opportunity, we will kill them with one blow. Finally, try to drive them in one direction. If they split up and escape, it will be troublesome to find them, the Empress said. This was the tactic that they had been studying along the way. Of course, even though this type of wolf pack tactic wasn't in line with the Aboriginals' combat habits, everyone felt that it was worth a try when they thought about the pitiful number of winged cavalry warriors. After another hour, the winged cavalry scattered and hid in trees or other concealed places. There was a distance of 200 meters between each team of winged cavalry. Following them were the mounted scouts of the rebel army. However, they didn't expect the Aboriginals to receive the news and go around in front of them. They had always been wary of the pursuers behind them and not the interception in front of them. As a result, the mounted scouts only did a simple check and went back to report. The Empress was sitting on a tree branch about 7 meters in the air and swinging her legs in boredom. Ren Baqian was hanging from her leg and swinging his leg in the wind like a hanged ghost. "Are you coming up?" The Empress looked down at Ren Baqian. "The view here is good." Ren Baqian followed the Empress's legs in an arc in the air. He suddenly thought of a song. "Let's paddle." However, the view here was good, and he could see the official road clearly through the gaps between the branches. He couldn't see anything from the Empress's position. As for looking up, the Empress's leg was pressed against the branch, so he couldn't see anything. At this moment, under the sun, an army was marching forward with heavy footsteps. The defeat and the continuous days of walking had caused the morale of the rebel army to hit rock bottom. The 150,000 soldiers stretched for dozens of kilometers, and they couldn't see the end of the army. Everyone waited until the sky turned dark, and only half of the rebel army had passed. At this time, they were in the middle of the rebel army. However, the leader of the rebel army was nowhere to be seen. Ren Baqian swung up from the branch and let go of the Empress's leg. She grabbed his arm in midair and pulled him to sit beside her. "Your Majesty, do we continue to wait or use another tactic?" Ren Baqian asked. Previously, they had already predicted 2 scenarios. The first was that they didn't find the leader of the enemy. They would charge forward and kill one wave before retreating. They wouldn't want unnecessary casualties. Just like hunting a powerful beast in the mountains, they would exhaust their blood and strength bit by bit. There was still a 5-day journey from here to the Yunza, which was enough to drain their blood dry. Everyone hoped for the second scenario. As mentioned above, they would immediately find the leader of the rebel army, launch a surprise attack, and behead him. Then, they would defeat the rebel army in a wave of attacks, and finally pursue and kill them. "I'm hungry." The Empress looked at him first. Rinpoche took out a Snickers bar from the bag at his waist and stuffed it into the Empress's hand. "Your Majesty, have some dessert first." Lin Xiaola, who was on the tree beside them, perked up her ears. She stepped on the tree and landed on the one that Rinpoche and the Empress were on. She hugged the tree trunk with both hands and looked at the bag at Rinpoche's waist. The Empress took the Snickers bar and instructed, "Inform Gong Zheng not to act rashly. Wait until nightfall to investigate." Rinpoche grabbed a handful of candy and gave it to Lin Xiaola. "Did you hear that?" Chapter 561. Rinpoche had seen the Great Xia army set up camp, and everything had its own set of strict rules. Every day, the scouts would report back on the suitable location to set up camp. After the commander chose the location, he would use tree trunks and tough branches to build a simple wall to block the enemy's line of defense. Sometimes, 2 trenches would be dug outside the camp, or caltrops would be sprinkled to form another line of defense. Everything in the camp was arranged in an orderly manner. Large pits were dug at regular intervals to serve as toilets. If Great Xia was a regular army, these rebel soldiers would be reduced to refugees in Rinpoche's eyes. Setting up camp? No. Public toilets? Similarly, no. Dozens of rebel soldiers surrounded the bonfires below, all of them lying on the ground in a disorderly manner as they rested. If anyone wanted to go to the toilet, they would do so in the wilderness. Rinpoche rubbed his chin. With the quality and morale of these rebel soldiers, a single charge from the Protector of the South would probably be enough to defeat them. After pondering for a while, Rinpoche turned his attention back to the Empress. At this moment, the two of them were sitting side by side on a tree branch. The surroundings were dark, and the rebel soldiers were noisy at the foot of the mountain. It was quiet on the mountain with the occasional sound of beasts. Rinpoche leaned to one side and nudged the Empress with his shoulder. "What's the matter?" The Empress opened her eyes and looked over. "It's nothing." Rinpoche smiled. After a while, he nudged the Empress with his shoulder again. The Empress narrowed her eyes and looked at him. Her gaze was so clear that it was as if she could see through his heart. She didn't say anything and directly grabbed his collar, lifted him up, and shook him until his entire body went limp. Only then did she place him back on the tree branch. She used 2 fingers to gently clamp his clothes to prevent him from falling down. Rinpoche couldn't possibly say that he was just fooling around. His entire body felt numb as he leaned on the Empress's shoulder and said, "I just feel that it's pretty good to sit here quietly with your Majesty." "Humph." The Empress let out 2 soft snorts. "The moonlight is so beautiful." The Empress looked up and saw that the canopy of the surrounding trees blocked most of the sky, so she couldn't see the moon. She removed 2 fingers from Rinpoche's clothes and pulled his face, asking, "Where's the moon?" "In my heart." "Ouch, ouch, 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 ouch." Rinpoche was halfway through his sentence when he felt the Empress's fingers exerting more force. After another 4 hours, it was already late at night. Finally, he received news from the north. Using his binoculars, he observed that there was a place in the north where there were more carriages near the bonfire. He also saw a person who looked like Rao Yu. After all, women with that kind of body shape were rare, and even rarer in the army. That's it. The Empress immediately decided, "Your Majesty, why don't we have Protector General Shi and the others make a move first, and see if they can lure out other fish?" "All right." The Empress carried Rinpoche and landed under a tree. Under the guidance of the person who came, they arrived more than 5 kilometers to the north and found Shi Wanya and the rest. Rinpoche took the binoculars and looked in the direction that they were pointing at. There was a relatively large open space with a bonfire in the middle and many carriages parked around it. The campfire was surrounded by female guards, and there were also people patrolling the area. The security here was much stronger than in other places. Rao should be here. Rinpoche nodded. Among the three factions, the Green Bellflower had the most women. This subject requests for battle. Qing Ping cupped his fists and said, "Has the winged cavalry made the arrangements?" The Empress asked, "Your Majesty, it has been arranged." Gong Zheng, who rushed over, said, "Approved." The Empress flicked her skirt. The surrounding people seemed to have received a signal and immediately looked murderous. Qing Ping cupped his fists at the Empress. Carrying a mace that was 2 meters long and 30 centimeters in diameter, he jumped down. First, he approached the other party's carriage, following which he leaped tens of meters into the air from a tree. His whole body erupted with vigor, and he smashed down like a meteorite. As Qing Ping's aura exploded, the carriages below exploded, and figures scuttled out. Among them was a tall and fat woman, Rao Yu. She was carrying a pair of golden scissors and dodged with agility that didn't match her figure. Boom! There was a loud sound in the dark night. With Qing Ping as the center, a large crater with a radius of tens of meters formed. Whether it was the horses or the people inside, they were all turned into minced meat. "It's Qing Ping. Be careful." When Rao Yu was running for her life just now, she caught a glimpse of Qing Ping and hurriedly shouted, "You actually chased after me." She then asked Qing Ping with an ugly expression, "Ha ha 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 ha. I'm here to take your head." Qing Ping stood in the large crater, laughed, and jumped out. With a swing of the mace in his hand, the guards in front of him were swept away like broken dolls. With a sweep, Qing Ping leaped again and smashed toward Rao Yu. Rinpoche looked at Qing Ping's jumping figure from the mountain and felt that he was a jumping barbarian. Rao Yu nimbly dodged again and then retreated to the back. Two elders blocked Qing Ping's way. Where is Shi Wanya, Zhong Shun, and Qi Zixiao? Everyone turned their heads and looked around, trying to find out where the others were. Everyone knew that Qing Ping couldn't possibly be here alone. With that, Shi Wanya and Zhong Shun walked out of the forest step by step with the aura of a towering mountain. "We are here on Her Majesty's orders to wipe out your traitors. Why aren't you giving up?" Even though they already knew that Qing Ping wasn't alone, everyone's expression changed when they saw these two people. There were 3 Cardinal Heaven experts, and they were the ones in front of them. Previously in Wu City, it took 9 people to fight them to a draw. Now that Xing Yun's sword and Zui Cheng, who had condensed their heaven-grade weapons, had surrendered to the other party, the remaining 6 spirit wheel experts of the rebel army wouldn't be a match for these 3 people. If it weren't for the 3 strange beasts, these people would have to think of a way to escape. "The rest of you, come out together. Where's Qi Zixiao?" For more people appeared beside the 2 spirit wheel experts. Now, all 6 of them were present. "You're just a bunch of thieves. Why do you need Her Majesty's help?" Shi Wanya laughed. "I have nothing to say to you. I'm here to take your heads." After saying that, he placed the long-handled broadsword at his side. With a stomp of his foot, the broadsword swept toward the necks of the 6 people. Only a faint white line could be seen in the night. These people couldn't even feel the slightest sound of the wind. Seeing this broadsword, their expressions changed drastically and they retreated. After the broadsword, there was a boom in the air. It was as if even the air had been cut open. At this moment, the air collided with each other. Zongshen also made a move at the same time. His body suddenly leaped, and everyone felt that it wasn't a person but a huge, saber-toothed tiger that leaped over. The broadsword was the saber-toothed tiger's fangs. If they were slightly slower, they would be buried in the tiger's mouth. "Die, you traitor." Qing Ping passed 2 people and rushed toward Rao Yu. At this moment, Rao Yu had already retreated 100 meters. Hundreds of guards stood between them, but as Qing Ping waved his mace in the air, they were sent flying to both sides like broken dolls. Tisk tisk. Rao Yu's guards were all women with beautiful faces and good figures. Under the hands of this boorish Qing Ping, they couldn't even be seen as human beings. Why haven't those 3 strange beasts come out yet? They can't have run away, right? Rinpoche muttered as he watched. With the momentum of the 3 of them, as long as the other party wasn't too far away, they would immediately be discovered. With the speed of these experts, it would only take a moment for them to arrive. Chapter 562. Half of the guards are gone, and the two sides are 50 meters apart. Qing Ping swung his staff again and sent a bunch of rotten dolls flying. There's still 6 guards left. Qing Ping swung his staff once, twice, thrice, 4 times, 5 times. 6 people were sent flying in 5 strikes. 2 of them hit 2 people, and the last one twisted his waist. Qing Ping is invincible. He's already close to Rao Yu. Rao Yu has nowhere to hide and is filled with fear. Rao Yu draws her sword and fights, but she is sent flying. If those 3 strange beasts are going to appear, this is the last chance. The last chance. The last chance. There is no chance. Rao Yu was smashed into a pie by Qing Ping. It was like a rolling pin smashing into a dumpling, and the dumpling filling spilled out. The Empress thought about the scene that Ren Baqian described, and suddenly felt that her appetite had been affected. She slapped the back of his head and complained, "Are you talking about the news?" The Empress watched a lot of news broadcasts on Earth and understood everything about Earth through them. She had a deep impression of them. Ren Baqian smacked his lips and said, "Rao Yu is dead, and those 3 strange beasts didn't appear. I'm afraid they have escaped, and Xie Kun didn't appear either." At this time, a shout came from the foot of the mountain. "The leader of the bandits is dead. Aren't you all going to kill yourselves?" The Empress ordered, "Kill them." After finishing her sentence, she sat on a rock at the side. It was obvious that she wouldn't have the chance to kill them this time. Gong Zheng gave the order, and many winged cavalry warriors charged toward the panicking rebel soldiers. Before they could get close, flashbangs exploded in front of them one after another, blinding them. The aboriginal soldiers wore a monocle on one eye. As long as they were a certain distance away, they would be able to close one eye. The other eye was covered by a sunglass, which didn't affect their charge even if there were flashbangs. "Ah, I'm blind, I'm blind." One of the dozen idiots covered one eye and almost fell. Serve them right. Ren Baqian couldn't help but curse when he heard the shouts from below. This bunch of idiots had told him so many times, but they still fell for it. "Zhuolong," Ren Baqian called out. "Sir Ren, bring some men to the north to find traces of Xie Kun and the 3 exotic beasts. Also look for the elephant, monkey, and insect soldiers. They should be among the rebels. If you discover them, don't stop them. Report back immediately." After Ren Baqian finished speaking, he thought for a while, took out 16 or 17 flash grenades from his bag, and threw them to Zhuolong. "Use them to defend yourself. When you use them, remove the ring and throw them in front of the opponent." "Thank you, my lord." Zhuolong cupped his fists and whistled. All the Baihu in the forest gathered towards him. Zhuolong divided everyone into 8 teams. Each team had 2 flash grenades, and the 8 teams disappeared into the night, heading towards the north to search. After everyone disappeared, Ren Baqian looked down the mountain and saw groups of winged cavalry cutting up the rebel soldiers. A small group of rebel soldiers didn't even last 2 rounds before collapsing in a pool of blood. Subsequently, the winged cavalry began to kill in all directions. When they saw a large group of enemy soldiers, they threw a series of grenades to blow them up before rushing forward to kill them. In addition to Rao Yu's death, the rebel soldiers at the foot of the mountain were harvested like rice straws in an extremely short period of time. The rebel soldiers nearby either died or fled. The rebel soldiers in the distance also began to flee due to the commotion. It was chaos everywhere. The situation seemed to be very good. However, Ren Baqian knew that even if the winged cavalry went all out, how many could they kill? It would be fine if Rao Yu and Xie Kun were dead. Now that Xie Kun was still alive, it seemed like this battle wasn't over yet. The most important thing now wasn't to chase after the rebel soldiers, but to find Xie Kun's location. Of course, there were also the spirit wheel experts below. Ren Baqian looked down. After Qing Ping killed Rao Yu and joined the battle, these spirit wheel experts were already blocking left and right. He looked back and finally found Lin Xiaola, who was sitting under a tree and dozing off. "Time to wake up and get to work." Ren Bachien pinched Lin Xiaola's face, which was so tender that water could be squeezed out. Water could really be squeezed out. Ren Bachien's finger was full of saliva, which made him want to curse out loud. He conveniently rubbed Lin Xiaola's body twice to get rid of the saliva. There are 6 spirit wheel experts below. I'll give you 500 grams of candy for each one you kill, and you'll lose 500 grams for each one that escapes, Ren Bachien said. Lin Xiaola, who had just opened her eyes, moved her ears, and stared blankly at Ren Bachien. After a while, she realized what Ren Bachien had said and immediately disappeared. Ren Bachien picked up his binoculars and looked into the distance. He didn't know who had scattered the bonfire, but he could only see the silhouettes of a few figures below with the help of the moonlight. He could also hear the sounds of weapons clashing and roaring, as well as the sounds of air compression and explosions, as well as the sounds of weapons smashing on the ground. Ren Bachien put down his binoculars, sat beside the Empress, and said, "Just a little bit more. We're still missing Siekuan and the 6 doors." The Empress was expressionless, but she was sick of Tianjing Basin. She had been delayed here for too long, and it seemed like she couldn't leave for the time being. The 2 of them sat there quietly. The battle at the foot of the mountain was still going on, but the sounds of it had started to move into the distance. The Empress's ears twitched as she heard some sounds. Not long after, Ren Bachien also heard it. It was the sound of someone running in the forest, accompanied by the sound of heavy breathing. There weren't many of them, only about 3 or 4 of them. It seemed like they were a few clever and lucky rebel soldiers who had escaped from the winged cavalry. They thought that this place should be safer since the winged cavalry had rushed down from here. After all, there was a saying on Earth, "The most dangerous place is the safest place." Even though this saying didn't exist in this world, there was a slang saying with a similar meaning. Running toward this place had indeed allowed them to escape from being hunted down, and this made them extremely happy. However, there was still the Empress on the mountain, and she was more terrifying than everyone at the foot of the mountain. Furthermore, there were more than 10 bodyguards, and any one of them could easily kill them. That was as far as their luck went. The 2 bodyguards silently walked in the direction of sounds. A moment later, a few blood-curdling screams could be heard. It was another night of killing. By the time dawn arrived, only blood and corpses were left at the foot of the mountain. Regardless of whether it was the rebel soldiers or the winged cavalry, they had already run further and further away during the night of killing. As dawn broke, the Baihu from the Protectorate began to come back one after another. "Sir, we found the elephant soldiers, but only the elephants are there and the people are missing. We haven't found the rest, and we speculate that they may have escaped from the west," Zhuo Lung reported after compiling the information from everyone. Ren Bachien thought that the other party probably felt that escaping with the elephant soldiers would be too easy to expose, so they even abandoned them. "Where are the elephants?" Ren Bachien asked. "They ran towards the east. Send a few people to chase after them. Don't let them get too far away. Try to see if you can bring these giant elephants back. After all, they were domesticated, so there should be a way. If it doesn't work, follow them and leave marks along the way," Ren Bachien instructed. These elephant soldiers were good stuff. If they could be controlled, they could be sent to the Protectorate of the Northeast to fight against the Yun Nation. These elephant soldiers were less lethal to the Aboriginal soldiers, but they were very useful against the Yun Nation's battle formation. Those ordinary people were like ants in front of these giant elephants. After another few hours, Shiwanya and the others came back one after another. They had a few wounds on their bodies, but with their recovery abilities, they could only be considered minor injuries. "Where's Lin Xiaola?" Ren Bachien looked behind the 3 of them and didn't see Lin Xiaola. One ran away, and she went to chase after him, Qing Ping replied. Chapter 563. Lin Xiaola threw the unrecognizable head at Ren Bachien's feet and looked at him with an embarrassed expression. Her eyes were filled with the word candy. "I'll bring it to you in 2 days," Ren Bachien said as he threw a handful of candies to her. Lin Shaola stuffed the candy into her arms with a satisfied look on her face. The airport on both sides had finally become 2 steamed buns. Otherwise, it would be awkward to have one big and one flat. Then, she lay down and drooled. Rin Baqian didn't know if she was tired, but he felt that she might be hungry. She even fell asleep and kept smacking her lips. The winged cavalry came back one after another in the evening of the same day. With the group as the starting point, tens of thousands of corpses were spread out in a fan shape, especially in the north and south. Large piles of corpses were gathered together, like a purgatory. After resting for a night, they split into 2 groups and continued south. Among them, Qing Ping and the winged cavalry were responsible for clearing up the routed soldiers that were running towards the south. As for the northern side, the protector to the south was responsible for it. Meanwhile, the Empress Shi Wanya, Zhong Shun, Lin Shaola, and Rin Baqian led some of the Baihu from the rearguard commandery straight to the 6 doors in the south. If he guessed correctly, the people of the 6 doors must be preparing to escape back to their lair. Siekuan was most likely with them. After traveling for another 3 days, they finally arrived at a location outside the 6 doors. Whether they were going to the Great Cloud Swamp or the 6 doors, they would have to pass through this location. Many of the people from the 6 doors were at the Manwil level, and some of them weren't even at the Manwil level. This journey would take at least 5 days, and it would be even slower if they took a detour. They weren't in a hurry. Rin Baqian first dispersed the people from the rearguard commandery, leaving at least 2 Baihu at every place where people might pass by. After that, he returned to Earth, but when he returned, the other party still hadn't arrived. However, there was one more thing in Rin Baqian's hand. It was a 2-palm-sized box with a display screen and a probe lens. This was an upgraded version of the detector that Yang Sun had brought last time. Its upper limit had been raised from 1,500 to 4,000. It didn't detect combat power, but vitality. However, vitality was equivalent to combat power to a certain extent. Rin Baqian first took a glance at Zhuolong. The number on the screen below the lens rose rapidly and finally stopped at 960. Rin Baqian was shocked. Zhuolong's blood and qi were actually so high. After all, he had completed the visualization of fire after consuming Shueka. He had completed 3/5 of the 5 visualization, and he had only increased it from 158 to 201. It was equivalent to 40 ordinary people or 10 Special Forces soldiers. He estimated that he would only have about 400 blood and chi points when he reached the Earth embryo realm. One had to know that he had eaten 2 heaven and earth treasures. One was Su Wen's peach, and the other was Ning Saichen's Shueka. There were still many medicinal effects hidden in his body, and his blood chi value was much higher than that of an ordinary wheel expert. However, Zhuolong's blood and qi had reached more than 900 points, which was 4.5 times of Rin Baqian's. Rin Baqian estimated that Zhuolong was at the advanced level of the Earth Wheel level, which was also known as the Earth Embryo Realm. As long as he perfected the Earth Embryo Realm and passed through the Heavenly Gate, he would be able to attain the Spirit Wheel level. In addition, he was from the largest spiritual mountain sect in Tianjing Basin, and the other martial artists weren't much stronger than him. In other words, the upper limit of an Earth fetus's combat power was between 1,000 to 1,200. Rin Baqian looked at the other guards that the Empress brought with her. Their combat power was between 1,000 to 1,300, and these were just the ordinary guards in the palace. The real experts, like Gong Zheng, held positions in various departments. No wonder it was said that the martial artists from Great Xia and the other countries were far inferior to the aboriginal warriors of the same level. The martial artists who had reached the upper limit of the Earth Embryo Realm were only comparable to the ordinary guards in the palace, let alone the ordinary Earth Wheel experts. In the aboriginals, the four-way heaven was equivalent to the man-will level, the Kismet heaven was equivalent to the Earth Wheel level, and the cardinal heaven was equivalent to the spirit will level. Gong Zheng and the other guards were also at the Kismet heaven level, but they were much stronger than the palace guards. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to become the captain of the winged cavalry. 5 or 6 people at the same level wouldn't be his match. Ren Baqian guessed that Gong Zheng was probably close to the peak of the Kismet heaven level and was close to the cardinal heaven level. His combat power was between 1,600 to 1,800. It was a pity that Gong Zheng wasn't in front of him and couldn't verify his guess. Ren Baqian pointed the detector at Qing Ping, and the numbers on the monitor jumped wildly again. Ren Baqian even suspected that the monitor would explode again. When the monitor stopped moving again, Ren Baqian looked at the numbers and swallowed his saliva. There would be no harm without comparison. He was used to interacting with many spirit wheel experts and aboriginal bigwigs, so he didn't feel anything. Now that he was using the detector, he finally knew what the difference was. The number on the monitor was 3,115. It was more than 15 times that of his. One had to know that the difference in combat power wasn't just 50%, but it was the difference between boxing champion Mike Tyson and an ordinary person. One had to know that after reaching a certain level of cultivation, the value of blood and chi was only one of the values. There were also differences in strength, speed, resistance, reflexes, and the 5 senses. More than 15 times. This was probably the difference between a weak chicken and a huge elephant, right? Ren Baqian looked at Zongshan again, and the number was 3,669. When he looked at Shi Wanya, Ren Baqian was already afraid that the detector would explode. He kept his face far away for fear that it would explode. Based on the current value of blood and chi, he could only rely on his face to make a living. 39.27. Shi Wanya's value of blood and chi had reached the upper limit of the detector. As for the Empress, there was no need to look at it at all. Ren Baqian guessed that the value of the Empress's blood and chi was at least 5,000. The scientists on Earth had set the upper limit of the detector at 4,000 because they thought that it was sufficient. It turned out that the scientists on Earth still underestimated the strength of super experts. It was probably poverty that limited their imagination. After all, the practitioners on Earth that they could come into contact with were already very strong, and they only had a value of about 100. What are you doing with that thing? It's been half a day. The Empress said, Your Majesty, do you still remember the detector from last time? This is a new one. It can check a person's blood and chi and estimate their strength. Ren Baqian carried the detector to the Empress's side and pointed the lens at each person to let the Empress see the values on it. Lin Xiaola's value of blood and chi was 2,299, which was unexpectedly low. Although Lin Xiaola's strength was originally lower than Qing Ping's, Ren Baqian thought that her value would be around 2,600 and didn't expect it to be only 2,300. This is quite interesting. What about me? The Empress and Ren Baqian put their heads together and looked at the numbers with interest. Your Majesty's strength can't be detected by this device, Ren Baqian said. This sentence made the Empress and the others on a different level. Although this was the truth, it sounded more pleasing to the ear. The Empress deeply agreed with him. She looked very happy, but she still pretended to be indifferent. Isn't this how things should be? Shi Wanya and the others also came over to look at the blood and chi value displayed by Ren Baqian's detector and clicked their tongues in wonder. This thing was really fun. It wasn't that accurate to measure spirit wheel experts. After all, spirit wheel experts didn't have high blood and chi values, but they had spirits and heaven-grade weapons. Lin Xiaola was the same. Although her blood and chi value wasn't high, she was good at speed and the strange moves or hunting techniques from her memory. This made the gap between her and Qing Ping's strength much smaller than the difference in blood and chi value. In the past, Ren Baqian only knew that the experts in this world were very strong, but he didn't know how strong they were. Now, he finally had an idea. For the next 2 days, every time a Baihu came back, Ren Baqian would use the detector to take a look. Through this data, he had a complete understanding of the strength of an Earthwheel expert. Among those Baihu, the one with the lowest blood and chi value was only about 500, and he had just advanced to the Earthwheel level. The others had values ranging from 600 to 900, and there were 2 people with higher blood and chi values than Zhuolong. They were Zhu Nong and Xie Yunbing. both from the hidden village. Among them, the strongest was Xie Yunbing. His hair and beard were all white, and he looked like an angry lion. His blood chi value was a full 1,245, and he was no weaker than an ordinary guard. In addition, these martial artists of the Jianghu had a variety of moves, and many of them had ultimate skills, so they might even be slightly stronger. After waiting for a few days, everyone started to get a little impatient. After all, they had mobilized so many people just to deal with a few people. Even the Empress was waiting here. However, after waiting for so long, there was still no sign of the other party. The Empress lost her temper 3 times a day. Qing Ping and Shi Wanya were shot into a tree by the Empress, and Rinpochian was tied to a tree branch by the Empress after the thing that was used to tie Rinpochian up. It turned out to be the metal chain that was eating and drinking in his mind. Rinpochian was still hoping to use the metal chain to tie people up in the future, for example, to play binding play. However, it turned out that the metal chain was more afraid of the Empress. Fortunately, they finally found traces of the people from the 6 doors, and Rinpochian was able to free himself from the tree. He pushed a book, My Savage Ancestor. The ancestor was a woman. Chapter 564. Among the hills, 70 to 80 people were hurrying along nervously. From time to time, they would look back as if there were some ferocious beasts chasing after them. Commander Xie, de Yunza is just 15 kilometers ahead. We will be safe once we enter de Yunza. Even if Qi Zhixiao personally makes a move, it will be difficult to find us inside. Mr. Bu, who is still wearing a colorful feather shawl, said as he pointed to the front. Everyone was finally able to relax a little. 30 li. They will be able to reach it in half a day. It's better to be careful, Xie Kuan said. Don't let anything happen to us during this last stretch. Although he said this, his expression was also a lot more relaxed. He turned his head to look behind him and saw 2 boys and a girl on the backs of 3 guards. If not for the guards, these 3 boys and girls wouldn't have been able to reach here with their physical strength. Among the 70 to 80 people, half of them were members of the 6 doors who had bronze-colored skin and wore colorful feather shawls. Among them, the ones with white feather shawls were elephant trainers, the ones with bags all over their bodies were insect keepers, and the ones with red feather shawls were monkey keepers. The remaining half were Xie Kuan's guards. As the saying went, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Even though they were running for their lives, there were still dozens of guards following them. Other than that, there was also a giant blackbird, a giant python, and a group of monkeys that were running and jumping around. Rinpochian and the others stood in a forest in the distance. Rinpochian used his binoculars to look at everyone's expressions and laughed. They seemed to be quite relaxed. Do they feel that the Yunza isn't far away and that they are safe? Will they feel hopeless when they see us? They will feel hopeless. Zhuolong answered. As for Shi Wanya and the others, those who needed to clean their weapons and rest were doing so. I reckon that when they see Protector General Shi, their psychological shadow will break through the horizon. Rinpochian put down his binoculars and gave Zhuolong an admiring look. Sure enough, it was necessary to bring along a sidekick. Otherwise, it would be awkward to say it himself. Sir, I can understand the horizon, but what is psychological shadow? Zhuolong diligently asked. Rinpochian crossed his arms in front of his chest and pondered. After a long time, he still couldn't figure out how to explain. In the end, he gave Zhuolong a look of disdain and said, "You won't understand even if I explain. Principal Run, prepare the firewood and water. We will be eating that giant snake and bird tonight." Shiwanya picked up the long-handled saber that was lying across his knees and stood up with a smile. It's not a giant snake. It's a Mongshan ironhead. Slurp. Lin Xiaola, who was lying on the treetop above his head, didn't forget to correct the name even in her sleep. Once he opened his mouth, the water would flow 3,000 feet straight down. He almost thought that it was raining. Your Majesty, we're leaving. The earlier we settle this, the earlier we can return. Shiwanya, Zhongshan, and Qingping cupped their fists at the Empress. I'll go too. Lin Shaola jumped down from the tree. It was rare to see her so enthusiastic. He didn't know what kind of deep hatred she had for Ironhead Mongshan. When the fight starts in a while, finish off the rest, and don't let anyone escape, Rinpoche said to the Baihu from the rearguard commandery. This time, more than 20 Baihu from the rearguard commandery were all at the earthwheel level. It could be said that it was foolproof to eliminate 70 to 80 people. Shiwanya and the other two landed in front of Xiequan and the 6 doors. Shiwanya laughed and said, "Where else do you want to go? Let's stop here today. You should be honored that I'm here to take your lives." A few Cardinal Heaven experts intercepted a group of Earth Wheel and Man Wheel experts, some of whom weren't even at the Man Wheel level. This group of people could be considered lucky. Shiwanya, Xiequan, and the others were horrified when they saw the 3 people in front of them. They didn't expect that they would still be blocked by them after making such a big detour. Die! Shiwanya raised a saber and slashed out. The air in front of him exploded, and a ravine appeared on the ground. Behind Xiequan, a person suddenly exploded. It was as if a bomb had been buried in his body and exploded into flesh and blood. Ow! Not far away, the reddish-brown monkeys first stood on end as it pounced toward Shiwanya. The crow general also charged toward the 3 of them. It flapped its iron wings horizontally and collided with Qing Ping's mace, producing a loud sound. Qing Ping was sent flying more than 4 meters by this wing attack. Subsequently, the crow general jumped up again, flapped its huge wings, and tried to grab Zhongshan with its iron claws. After missing its attack, it adjusted its center of gravity in the air and lowered its head to peck at Zhongshan. Rin Baqian watched this giant bird jump up and down, peck, and claw with his binoculars from afar. An inexplicable sense of familiarity arose in his heart. When he was young, his grandfather's old hen used to peck at him like this. As for the Mongshan iron head, it coiled up with its upper body upright and kept hissing. Surrounding it was Lin Chaola's figure, which was so fast that it couldn't be seen clearly. "They are moving to one side," Ren Baqian reminded after watching for a while. Seeing that Shiwanya and the others were moving to one side, Zwalong and the rest rushed out without Ren Baqian's instructions and surrounded the remaining people. Following a series of whistles, the monkeys in the distance pounced towards Zwalong and the rest. The insect keepers also shook off the bags hanging on their bodies, and poisonous insects crawled out and surrounded everyone. Despite this, they couldn't withstand the attacks of the people from the rearguard commandery. Most of these monkeys weren't at the man-wheel level, and only a few of the stronger ones were equivalent to man-wheel experts. Their only advantage was their speed. However, no matter how fast they were, they couldn't reach the level of an earthwheel expert. Almost every slash of a sword would dismember a monkey. In just a short while, the surrounding area was littered with monkey corpses. The reddish-brown monkey that was fighting with Shiwanya in the distance let out a mournful cry, threw Shiwanya, and pounced over. However, it had no choice but to twist its body in midair to avoid Shiwanya's slash from behind. Afterward, it let out a mournful cry while dealing with Shiwanya's continuous attacks. The ground near the 2 of them seemed to have been plowed as gullies covered the ground. "It's finally over." Rin Baqian stood there and sighed as he watched a Baihu cut off Xiequan's head. "Your Majesty, why is it that every slash of Shiwanya's seems to emit saber energy? Almost every slash leaves a mark on the ground. Why can't you see the situation? Is it because you concentrate your power at one point, and this is a manifestation of perfect control?" Rin Baqian asked. The Empress looked at him with disdain and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? I should have told you to read more books. Shiwanya's technique is like this. In addition to the saber in his hand, there is also saber energy that blends into the ground and explodes under the enemy's feet. The marks on the ground are traces of the saber energy. What about Captain Qing's mace? I don't see him carrying it with him usually, but he takes it out every time there is a battle. It can't be a heaven-grade weapon, right?" This time, the Empress didn't look down on him. She explained faintly. When his mace was forged, a cloud crystal was integrated into it. As such, it has some special functions, just like your saber that can change its length at will. However, your saber is too brittle and will break at the slightest touch. The two of them chatted while paying attention to the battle in the distance. The first strange beast to die was unexpectedly fast. It was the monkey with long reddish-brown fur. When the group of monkeys died, it went crazy. Then, Shiwanya seized the opportunity to take a punch from it and chopped off one of its legs with a backhand slash. Rather than chopping it off, it was more like knocking it off. The monkey's skin was like copper and bones of iron. Shiwanya's saber broke its bones, but its skin was still attached. Not long after, the monkey died under Shiwanya's saber. Shiwanya slashed its head 3 times before it was split open. Following which, everyone on the battlefield was completely wiped out. Not a single one of them managed to escape. The iron-headed mountain was finally dead. After the Crow General ran away, it was first chopped into 2 by Zhongshun. Then, Qing Ping smashed its head more than 10 times with his mace before it died. It was indeed an iron-headed beast. We have finally killed all of them. The Empress wrinkled her nose and smiled. She was in a good mood. Chapter 565. In the evening, a team of more than 2,000 people and hundreds of carriages were on the road from Gu City to Tianjing Basin. Between Tianjing Basin and Gu City, there was an endless stream of various caravans. Although caravans with more than 1,000 people weren't rare, they could occasionally be seen. In particular, when many caravans traveled together, it was impossible to tell if they were a single team or if there were even more people. It was just that in the past 2 months, the number of caravans traveling between Tianjing Basin and Gu City had decreased significantly. The war in Tianjing Basin had hindered the footsteps of many caravans. Furthermore, the checkpoints on the road from Tianjing Basin to Gu City were stricter. Many large caravans couldn't get a pass, and some caravans with the backing of the 3 major powers were even killed. Following that, a few small caravans that were previously unknown developed extremely quickly within the past month or so and monopolized most of the supplies in Tianjing Basin. Behind these small caravans were the shadows of one or even several sections. Behind these sects was the shadow of an organization called the Rear Guard Commandery. However, this team was different from the other caravans. This was an army that would make people lower their heads at a glance from afar, not daring to offend them in the slightest. The Winged Cavalry, the strongest combat force of Dayo, which had entered Tianjing Basin 3 months ago, had returned. At the same time, the imperial carriage of Dayo's Empress, Qi Zixiao, who was ranked 5th in the world, also returned. Almost no one outside of Tianjing Basin knew about the death of Spirit Spear Tengyu. Otherwise, if the news of Qi Zixiao killing Tengyu spread, it would probably cause another shock. In addition to the Winged Cavalry and the Empress's imperial carriage, the most surprising thing was that there were many people from Tianjing Basin in the team. This surprised many people. "This is Gu City," Qing Yun Sword muttered to himself in the team. "First time here." Ren Baqian heard him and turned to ask. "No, the last time was 70 years ago. It's so long ago that I can't remember." Qing Yun Sword shook his head. His eyes flickered, and it seemed like he was very uneasy. The people who followed behind Ren Baqian all had uneasy looks in their eyes. After 70 years, they had finally come out. This time, they didn't come to Gu City with the caravans to purchase all kinds of supplies like before. No matter where they went, they felt like they were inferior. By coming here this time, they had become a part of this place. "This is the first time this old man has come here. Last time, I came down from the mountains." Li Fu stroked his beard and smiled. Li Fu, Qingyan Sword, Zhuo Cheng, Zhuolong, a few guards, 2 newly promoted Qianhu, a few Baihu, and the 3 Confucian scholars from the Great Xiao were all in the group. Xiaokuan had been killed a month ago, but the Crow General had escaped. It was just a strange beast, so no matter how strong it was, no one would take it seriously. After that, Shiwanya was mainly responsible for clearing up the fleeing rebels. Ren Baqian, on the other hand, arranged for the purge of many sects in the south, dealt with the matters of the rearguard commandery, and formulated a new system for Tianjin Basin. First, Tianjin Basin was divided into 6 districts. There were 3 districts in the north and 3 in the south, and they were known as the 6 lower prefectures. Each prefecture was garrisoned with 1,000 aboriginal soldiers and a newly established prefecture army. If the people of Tianjin Basin wanted to go from one prefecture to another, they would need to have Dao guidance. The cities in the 6 lower prefectures only had city commanders who were responsible for issuing decrees and handling government affairs. They didn't have military power. The guards in the cities were under the jurisdiction of the prefectural army of the 6 lower prefectures and had to be rotated every 3 years. As a result, the 6 lower prefectures were firmly under the control of the imperial court, and it would be extremely difficult to rebel again. In addition, Rinpoche scattered the rearguard commandery across the 6 lower prefectures and recruited a large number of strong men to ensure that there was a Baihu in every 3 cities. In addition to the cities where the Baihu was located, the other 2 cities had to have at least 1 Zongqi, 2 Xiaoqi, 20 Tiki, and hundreds of strong men from all walks of life hidden among the people. This wasn't a difficult task for the sects that had invested their wealth in the rearguard commandery. As a result, any movement in the 6 lower prefectures could be heard by Rinpoche through the rearguard commandery. The headquarters of the rearguard commandery in Tianjin Basin was called the Tianan Garrison, and it was located in Gu City. After all, they could only contact Rinpoche through the radio station outside of Tianjin Basin. Other than the winged cavalry warriors and 300 soldiers from the Protector of the South, the rest of the people in this group were people from Tianjin Basin. Most of them were craftsmen and a small number of commoners who were brought back from the north. This time, there were very few casualties in the north. Most of the rebels came from the south, so the control in the south was stricter than in the north. This time, the people selected were also from the north. There was no need to mention the craftsmen. The commoners were prepared to stay in Lan City as small vendors or do odd jobs in the city. This was to let the aboriginals get used to seeing people from Tianjin Basin from time to time and get along well. Rinpoche was working hard in the direction of what he had told Qingyun Sor before. This wasn't only for the people of Tianjin Basin, but also for Dayo. It was unstable to walk on one leg, and Dayo was currently walking on one leg. Rinpoche had high expectations for the role that these remnant people of Tianjin Basin could play. Sitting on the fork-horned cow, Rinpoche thought for a while and said to the people behind him, "Don't call yourselves remnant people in the future. It will always remind people of your past. In the future, you should be at ease and integrate into Dayo as part of Dayo." Qingyun Sword understood what Rinpoche meant, exchanged glances with Zhuocheng, and replied, "In that case, let's call ourselves the Jing tribe. The Jing tribe of Tianjin Basin. In that case, let's call them that." Rinpoche nodded. It seemed that not only the aboriginals, but even they couldn't let it go so easily. As the group began to enter Gu City, the people behind Rinpoche sized up the city entrance with apprehensive and hopeful eyes. The commoners in the city also began to size up some people at the back of the group with curious eyes. For the next few days, the Empress contacted Lan City and the other protectorates to handle various matters. Although there were reports sent every day, it wasn't as convenient as using the radio to chat in the group chat. On the other hand, Rinpoche settled down the people from the rearguard commandery. At the same time, he asked Gong Zheng to allocate some manpower to send the commoners and craftsmen to Lan City. Of course, there were also the hundreds of carts of goods, which were the biggest material harvest from this rebellion. Other than the sects in the south that had surrendered, the rest of the sects had all been wiped out. The materials and gold from those sects were naturally used to enrich the national treasury and the Empress's small treasure house. All the secret manuals were given to Rinpoche. Rinpoche was preparing to build a huge library in Lan City. All the secret manuals of the sects would be placed in it. After that, he would also collect the secret manuals of the aboriginals and fill them in. Chapter 566. In Dayo, a small city that wasn't on the main road, didn't have any special products, and had a population of only tens of thousands of people. The salt team is here. The salt team is here. As a convoy entered the city, the people in the city immediately boiled over. Many people ran to a certain place in the city with their bags of salt. When they reached the place, they found that it was already densely packed with people. A young man with thick eyebrows and big eyes stood in the crowd and felt the crowd behind him. He turned his head and looked behind him before shouting, "What's with the crowd?" This time, the convoy is only a little big. It's already pretty good if 1 out of 10 people can buy salt. Those at the back might as well go out of the city to pick up stones and lick them. If you are late, there won't even be any stones left. The so-called pick up stones and lick referred to a type of marble outside the city that was bitter, salty, and slightly poisonous. However, there was a shortage of salt these days. Many people had no choice but to go out of the city to pick up this kind of stone and lick it before eating it. If Renbachian was here, he would know that this was a type of carbonate rock. Following the young man's words, the people at the back immediately started cursing, and soon, a chaotic fight broke out in the crowd. An old man in his 70s or 80s jumped 2 to 3 meters high and kicked out with a strong gust of wind. An auntie on the street punched many people in the eyes with her fists. Even a 10-year-old child darted in and out of the crowd and occasionally kicked the groin from time to time. Fighting was the nature of the Aboriginals, and this was true even for the seemingly simple residents of this small city. As a result, fighting over a small matter had become a common occurrence. The basic process usually went like this: "What are you looking at? What's wrong with looking at you? I'm going to beat you up." Then there was a round of punches and kicks. It was just that a large-scale battle like today's would only happen every time a salt team arrived. Due to the lack of salt, many people felt that they were getting weaker and weaker. By the time a newly formed militia stopped the fight, many people were glaring at each other with injuries on their bodies. However, after a while, they burst out laughing again. Not long after, the militia transported a few carts of salt bags to the open space in front of the crowd and started selling them at a low price under the supervision of the city commander. Furthermore, each person could only buy 2 taels. The price is so low. It's a pity that there's too little. Otherwise, we could buy more and keep it at home. There's always a shortage of salt. Dream on. Fortunately, I came early today, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to buy these. When the people at the back saw the salt in front of them, they were immediately disappointed. Just like what the kid had said, it would be good if 1 out of 10 people could buy it. When will there be more salt? Yeah, if I don't eat salt, I won't have any strength. Everyone, the Yin Nation, Chen Nation, and Great Xia have cut off our salt supply routes. It has been 2.5 months since a single bag of salt has been shipped in. The city magistrate, who was also one of the few experts in the city, stood at the front and announced loudly, "Kill them. Get the salt back. Kill them. Kill them. Kill. Kill. Kill." The crowd below immediately began to shout. The originally simple and honest citizens were immediately filled with murderous intent, and their faces also revealed fierce expressions. If people from other countries were to see this scene, they would understand why the Aboriginals were able to contend against other countries with such a small population, be it in terms of population, financial resources, or equipment, and even win against them. Even though these commoners had lived on this plain for 70 years, their bones were still filled with that kind of wild nature. Even children who didn't grow up fighting with ferocious beasts in the mountains were still full of the desire to fight. Everyone, Deo no longer needs to transport salt from the outside world. Deo has its own salt pans, the city magistrate said. When these words were spoken, everyone below was stunned. Deo's salt was completely transported from other countries. This was something that even children knew. Since when did Deo have its own salt pans? First of all, I want to thank Sir Run, the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy. He was the one who researched how to produce salt from the brine in the mountains. Everyone below pondered one after another. Where was this Black Bamboo Academy? Who was Sir Run? They didn't remember such a person in the imperial court. After a long time, someone finally remembered that this person couldn't be the gigolo that Her Majesty had found, right? "Which gigolo of Her Majesty is this Sir Ren that you're talking about?" someone asked. "How rude." The city magistrate's face darkened. Then, he pondered for a while. Even though these words were a little disrespectful to the Empress, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with them. He knew a little more than the commoners, and had heard about some of the things that happened during the war with Great Xia in the north. However, he still saw Rinpochian as a gigolo, let alone the others. "He is a gigolo because his face is white," the city magistrate added. "I didn't say anything else." The voice from the crowd made everyone laugh. The city magistrate might as well not have said anything. In any case, thanks to Sir Ren, we have salt to eat. However, this salt has only been produced for a few months and needs to be transported to various cities. As a result, there is a little less salt now. However, there will be more and more salt in the future. Everyone will have it, so you don't have to worry. Even though the people below were all laughing, the tension caused by the lack of salt had been alleviated a lot. Furthermore, their impression of Rinpochian had improved greatly. Rinpochian's reputation among the commoners had improved a lot during this period. Rinpochian and the Empress stayed in Tianjing Basin for more than 3 months. Many things had happened in the outside world. There were 3 things that attracted everyone's attention. The first was the war between the Protectorate of the Northeast and the Yun Nation. Before the Empress entered Tianjing Basin, Zhu Wuzhen had scattered the allied warlords into the interior of Dayo to destroy villages and strongholds. This was exactly the same tactic that Great Xia had used. In the early stages, many of the villages at the border were destroyed, but the villagers taught the allied warlords a lesson. The number of soldiers was less than 2,000, and they were repeatedly defeated by a village of about 100 people. This made the allied warlords lose a lot of face. The reason for this was that the defenseless villages didn't have the time to move, so there was no way out. They fought to the last man and wouldn't stop until he was dead. However, if the casualties of the allied warlords' young masters exceeded 15%, they would retreat, and if the casualties exceeded 20%, they would collapse. In addition, most of the adult aboriginals were at the man-will level. As a result, the Yun Nation's advance in the early stages was extremely slow. By the time they learned from their painful experiences and formed a large army, the newly trained new army arrived. The result was obvious. When Rinpochian and the others returned to Gu City, Zidonglai had already conquered 4 cities in the Yun Nation. The second thing was that the Chun Nation had already declared war on Dayo. The war in the southeast wasn't intense. Both the Zhuo Nation and the Chun Nation didn't seem to have much interest in fighting. Both sides stared at each other at the border every day. Occasionally, there would be a small fight, but it was more like an exhibition than a war. Dayo was happy to see this, but they didn't know how long this situation would last. The third and most important thing was that the salt transportation routes from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Chun Nation of Dayo had been cut off. Since the Chun Nation sent their troops, not a single grain of salt had been transported into Dayo. This made many people very nervous. Fortunately, the imperial court had recently released a batch of salt. There were 100,000 stones of salt, which was 2 million kilograms, which was enough for more than 3 million people to eat for a month. After some restrictions, it could barely be enough for 7 million people. In addition, the imperial court was vigorously promoting the fact that Rinpochian had researched how to produce salt in the mountains. The people of Dayo still had a high degree of trust in the imperial court. What happened in that small city was happening everywhere, which eased the tension in various places. However, only a few people knew that this amount of salt had been accumulated over the past 6 months. Although salt wells had been dug and the salt works had been expanded, the salt production speed had increased significantly over the past 3 months. However, only 30,000 stones of salt were produced every month, which was barely enough for 1 million people. Next, the most important thing was to rely on Zidonglai to seize the salt in the Yun Nation. As a result, the Empress's first order was for Zidonglai to occupy the Yun Nation as quickly as possible and send all the salt found in every city back to Dayo. Following the Empress's order, Zi Donglai completely let loose and attacked like a raging fire. Chapter 567. Ren Baqian wanted to go back to his courtyard and have a good sleep. However, the moment he stepped into the palace, he was summoned by the Empress to attend a court meeting. For a full 4 hours, Ren Baqian explained the situation in Tianjing Basin as well as some of the arrangements. Then, he listened to the reports of the other people and almost fell asleep. Only then did he drag his exhausted body back to the courtyard. As soon as he entered, he saw 2 big fellows with dark circles opening their bloody mouths and pouncing toward him. "Oh, you still remember me?" Ren Baqian laughed heartily as he lifted Gun above his head and rubbed his face against its furry body. A foul smell stained his face. After all, even though these 2 little fellows weren't hungry, they wouldn't be bathed every day. He tossed Gun aside, rubbed Tintian's head, and planned to return to the house. In the end, Gun's 4 paws hugged each of his legs. It seemed like the 2 little chaps missed him a lot. After shaking off the 2 little fellows with great difficulty, Ren Baqian went back to his room to take a look. After he left, someone cleaned the room every day, and it was very clean. He then fell asleep on his bed. On the other hand, after the court session was over, Lien Liang from the Department of the Army strolled toward the area where the people from Tianjing Basin had just settled down after entering the city. Qin Chuan saw him greeting people as soon as he left the palace, but he just smiled. His identity wasn't convenient, and Lien Liang's plan was very much in line with his intentions. To put it bluntly, Tianjing Basin had been in chaos for so many years. Even though they had surrendered, the people from the Ministry of War were the most displeased with them. They had to be beaten up first before anything else. Before Ren Baqian returned, he had contacted them through the radio station and built a brick and tile hut near the city wall to serve as a place for the people from Tianjing Basin to stay. In other words, it was a street that was completely sealed off and surrounded by high walls. There was only one entrance and exit, and there were guards stationed there. This was to prevent people from finding trouble with them. After all, Tianjing Basin had been restless for so many years and had provoked the Empress. Even though these people had returned here with the Empress, there were still many people who would find trouble with them. Because of this, he had specially arranged for people from the Public Order Division to patrol the vicinity every day to prevent any trouble from happening. However, the Public Order Division could stop ordinary people, but they could not stop Lien Liang from the Military Division. Not only did they not stop him, but they also stood far away with an expression as if they were watching a good show. Lien Liang brought his men to the end of the street and placed the broadsword in his hand that was exactly the same as Qin Chuan's on the ground, and roared, "All of you, come out." Following this shout, the commoners of Tianjing Basin who had just been settled here from afar immediately trembled in fear. Qin Yin Sword's heart skipped a beat. He jumped out of the courtyard and landed at the intersection of the street. He cupped his hands towards Lien Liang and said, "Sir, what can I do for you?" Although he had already guessed that there would be trouble, he didn't expect it to come so quickly. Although he didn't know who the person in front of him was, he felt a chill in his heart when he saw the people from the Public Order Bureau watching from afar. "Cut the crap. I'm here to fight. You have been causing trouble for so many years. Now that you have come to Lan City and my territory, let me see where you get your guts from." "Sir," Qin Yin Sword's mind was racing. How should he resolve this matter? On one hand, he could swallow the insult and humiliation. However, he and his men had just arrived, and someone had already come knocking on their door. If he swallowed the insult and humiliation, he was afraid that he would be looked down upon, and his days in the future would be even more difficult. However, if he were to fight with the other party, he was afraid that he would anger the other party and the others, and there would be endless trouble in the future. Come. Let me beat you up first. I'll let you see how sharp my broadsword is." Lien Liang didn't care what Qin Yun's sword was thinking and slashed at him. "Sir, you are so heroic." The attendants behind him cheered and laughed at the same time. If Ren Baqian or Tong Zhinya were here and heard this, they would be overjoyed. Indeed, if the upper beam isn't straight, the lower beam will be crooked. The words that Minister of War Qin Chuan always said were used by Lien Liang just like that. Qin Yin's sword was startled. He pointed with his sword, and the long sword on his back soared into the sky with a clang. It transformed into a ray of white light and pierced toward Lien Liang. Lien Liang swung his broadsword horizontally and deflected the sword. Then he slashed again and again with his broadsword. Each slash was powerful, heavy, and extremely fast. In just 6 or 7 slashes, there was a loud bang at the end of the street. The pillars on both sides of the street were chopped down, and the signboards fell to the ground. Qin Yin's sword was also forced to retreat step by step under the ferocious slashes of the broadsword. Qin Yin's sword changed his sword technique, and the long sword in the air split into 7. Like swimming fish, they circled toward Lien Liang. "Is this all you've got?" "That's all you've got," Lien Liang said contemptuously. Then he swept his broadsword around his body, causing a gale to blow across the entire street. Clang, clang, clang. After a series of collisions, the 6 long swords in the air were smashed into pieces. The last one rolled a few times in the air and fell back onto Qin Yin's sword's head. Lien Liang took a deep breath and then let out a beast-like roar. The muscles on his body bulged. His body leaped more than 10 meters and slashed at Qin Yin's sword with his broadsword. It felt like a tiger pouncing on a sheep and was unstoppable. The air stirred along with the broadsword in his hand. Clang! The long sword in the air was only blocked for a moment before it was sent flying. Qin Yin's sword retreated continuously from the corner of the street all the way to the middle of the street. His forehead was dripping with sweat. This aboriginal official of unknown origin actually had such terrifying strength. He wasn't much weaker than the god of massacre, Shiwanya. Previously, when he exchanged blows with Shiwanya, his vitality had been greatly damaged. Now, he couldn't use that sword technique anymore. However, the other party didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. It was as if the other party wouldn't stop until he killed Qin Yin's sword. Noisy. At this moment, a voice came from a nearby courtyard. A short black rod flew out from the courtyard and collided with Lien Liang's broadsword. This caused Lien Liang's broadsword to pause, and the aura that he had accumulated to the peak was knocked down. Instead of being shocked, Lien Liang was delighted. He laughed and said, "There's actually an expert here? However, I don't care what kind of expert you are. Take a blow from me first." After he finished speaking, the long sword dashed toward the courtyard like a dragon. "You disturbed my sleep." An old man with white hair and beard, who looked like a beggar, appeared outside the courtyard. The short rod in his hand pointed at Lien Liang's dragon-like broadsword. Clang! The long sword in Lien Liang's hand exploded, following which the short rod pointed at his chest and sent him flying, crashing into a courtyard. "You guys can continue fighting. Don't make a fuss and disturb my sleep." Li Fu smashed Lien Liang's long sword with one strike and sent Lien Liang flying. Only then did he turn around and return to the courtyard. "Thank you, Senior, for your help." Qin Yin's sword cupped his fists in gratitude. "What has it got to do with me? It's just that he was shouting so loudly that he disturbed my sleep." Li Fu's voice came from the courtyard. "Sir." Lien Liang's guard hurriedly ran over and found Lien Liang in a pile of rubble. He was vomiting blood while holding the hilt of his broadsword. His expression was as if his heart was being pierced by a knife. "My broadsword! Ah! If you continue to make noise, I won't hit your broadsword. I will hit your balls." Li Fu's voice came from afar, which made Lien Liang go crazy. If it was anyone else who came looking for trouble, but ended up hitting an iron wall, they would definitely feel ashamed and resentful. However, Lien Liang didn't care. In any case, he was used to being beaten up by Qin Chuan. However, the problem was his broadsword. 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 He had contributed all his assets to House Yunyan. The most valuable thing he had was this broadsword. This fight had cost him all his assets. Chapter 568. Ren Baqian estimated that he would arrive at the palace banquet in the evening. Many people were already there. Generally, the lower the position, the earlier they arrived. This was the case even in this world. Principal Ren. Many court officials greeted him. If Rinpochian was just a small character that the Empress took a fancy to, as if he had won the lottery back then, things were different now. Not to mention his performance in the war with Great Xia. The radio station's instant communication played a great role in this technologically backward world. The border and the imperial court could communicate with each other in a timely manner every day. This was a great information advantage that allowed Dayo to respond to any situation as quickly as possible. It allowed them to dispatch reinforcements and assign troops more accurately. Of course, in the eyes of the ordinary officials, the most important thing was the salt works in the mountains. If the salt route had been cut off previously, Dayo would have been anxious. They would have rushed to attack, engaged in bitter battles, and set up ambushes. However, the existence of the salt works gave Dayo more room to maneuver strategically. Although they didn't understand this term, it didn't mean that they didn't understand it. As a result, Rinpochian became a strange but very capable person in the eyes of many officials. He was strange because he was different from the aboriginals. His fighting strength was completely weak. He was capable because he came up with many things that had great effects and effects. Rinpochian found his seat and sat with a few officials from the Ministry of Works. "How's the farming going recently?" Rinpochian asked Guihong. In fact, when he came back, he saw the sweet potato vines and pumpkins in the fields far away from Lon City and felt that they should be doing well. Very good, very good." Guihong immediately smiled when he heard the question. Those pumpkins and sweet potatoes had already been harvested for 2 seasons and were all used as seeds to promote them throughout Dayo. These products were effective quickly, had high yields, and tasted good. Although they weren't as easy to exchange for meat or sell in a market as vegetables, they had a large yield and could fill one's stomach. As a result, the promotion went smoothly. "Sir Run, do you have any new crops on hand?" Guihong rarely saw Rinpochian. His mind was filled with his old business, so he immediately changed the topic to new crops. "If there is a suitable one, I will send it to Lord Gu." Rinpochian thought for a while. In fact, there were many crops on Earth that could not be found in this world. However, at present, what Dayo needed the most were crops with high yields that could fill their stomachs. Furthermore, these crops had to be compatible with Dayo's tropical mountainous climate. Therefore, there wasn't much room for choice. After chatting with Feng Ho for a while, Rinpochian heard a maniacal laughter coming from the entrance of the hall. It sounded like the voice of Tong Jinye. Following that, Qin Chuan angrily scolded, "Old man, if you don't shut up, this old man will let you have a taste of the sharpness of this old man's blade." "Ha ha 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 ha. Old man, why don't you pull out your knife for me to see? Even if I stretch out my neck for you to chop, you won't be able to do it." Tong Jinye yelled crazily as he spoke. Following that, the sound of fists and kicks could be heard from outside. The two of them had started fighting outside the hall. Many people who were nearby ran out to watch the show. They were just a bunch of onlookers who didn't mind the matter getting bigger. Even though the two of them were rank 3 officials, if the two of them were to fight, there wouldn't be anyone to stop them. The surrounding people were all munching on melon seeds, peanuts, and other nuts to watch the show. When Feng Ho, Guihong, who was beside Rinpochian, heard that there was a fight outside, he dragged Rinpochian out excitedly to watch the show with a smirk on his face. "What's going on?" Rinpochian knew that something was up when he saw their expressions. Is there a super expert among those abandoned people? Feng Ho remembered that Rinpochian definitely knew about those people and quickly asked, "Who provoked them?" Rinpochian immediately became spirited. It was indeed a super expert who was at least as tall as a 30-story building. Yesterday, Lien Liang wanted to give them a good beating. In the end, his weapon was broken and he suffered some minor injuries. When Sir Qin found out about this, he shouted, "Let me show you how sharp my blade is," and tried to test that person's trick. In the end, his weapon was also broken and his balls were beaten. Feng Ho laughed heartily. Rinpochian immediately looked like he was in pain. This Qin Chuan was really unlucky to bump into an iron plate. He didn't even try to find out about the other party's background. Li Fu's identity wasn't a secret. It could only be said that the aboriginals were used to being overbearing. After all, the big shots in the imperial court were all Cardinal Heaven experts. They didn't care about who their opponent was and only cared about where their opponent was. When everyone arrived at the entrance of the main hall, they heard cheers from both sides. Rinpoche looked up and saw Tong Jingye's 13 consecutive groin kicks. One kick after another, his feet never left his lower body. One had to know that Tong Jingye used to use the 13 consecutive Black Tiger Steals Heart technique. Qin Chuan was jumping around like a little girl. His legs were kicked a few times, and he looked like he was going crazy. Sir Run, who was that person yesterday? It seems like Sir Qin is in a lot of pain. Feng Ho asked with a smile. He was also a little curious. Come out and see if my saber is sharp or not. Rinpoche heard Qin Chuan's insolent voice when he walked to the corner of Jing Street. He saw Qin Chuan holding a steel saber from an unknown person and making a big fuss outside Li Fu's courtyard. A few minutes later, Li Fu came out of the courtyard with a crazed look on his face. He smashed Qin Chuan's steel saber with his rod and kicked his balls before leaving speechlessly. Chapter 569. Run, are these barbarians sick? Li Fu was furious and irritated when he saw Rinpoche. He had been tormented miserably for the past 2 days. No matter what, they were still a group of Cardinal Heaven experts. It seemed like he could easily defeat them with 2 or 3 moves, but it took a lot of effort. Furthermore, Li Fu didn't like fighting at all. All he could think about was finding the stairway to heaven, and fighting was just a last resort. However, he didn't expect that after his first fight, this group of people would come endlessly. There would be people challenging him every day, morning, afternoon, night, whether it was day or night. These bastards would come whenever they wanted to. If he didn't agree, they would quarrel endlessly outside. The loud voices of the aboriginals had made him nervous for several days. If it weren't for the hot air balloon and rocket that Rinpoche had promised him, he would have knocked them over and run away. Rinpoche was a little speechless. Although he knew that Li Fu was a good person, he didn't expect him to be this good. He really didn't know how he became the #1 expert in the world. Now, it was as if he was being bullied by those old fools. In fact, although he had always been the one kicking people's testicles, it seemed like he was the one being kicked now. You are the #1 expert in the world, and you are still alive. What a great opportunity it is to see the #1 expert in the world in the flesh. Besides, who doesn't worship their idol? Even though they all have high statuses, seeing the #1 expert in the world is like seeing a young idol. Isn't this exciting? In addition, I want you to give them some pointers. Rinpoche's words were half true and half false. Before coming here, he was really afraid that Li Fu would be anxious, so he came to take a look. However, based on the current situation, it wouldn't be a problem even if they struggled for a while. To be able to see Li Fu in action, even if it was just a few moves, was already very beneficial. Most importantly, there are many people. Almost all the people from secondary class, rank 3 and above, had been here once and were planning to come a second time. It was said that even the Minister of Revenue, Tu Wan, was tempted. Now, Li Fu's place was like a famous tourist attraction. Every day, one could see all kinds of big shots in the court. Even the Jing tribe people who had just moved here were a little speechless. Black Bamboo Academy will start classes the day after tomorrow. Senior, if you have nothing to do, you can go and listen to the classes. You can also find some peace and quiet, Rinpoche said after thinking for a while. Not interested. Just finish what you promised me as soon as possible. Li Fu waved his hand, not minding at all. He was just a little annoyed by those fellows who disturbed his peace. Seeing this, Rinpoche didn't say much. He laughed and bade farewell. In the end, as soon as he left the courtyard, he was stopped by someone. Sir Run, what are your arrangements for me? You can't possibly let me stay here without any status, right? Ning Kai-chen had a look of hidden bitterness on his face. Those who didn't know would think that Rinpoche had done something to him. Rinpoche looked at the gossipy expressions on the faces of the newly assigned guards. He didn't need to ask to know what they were thinking. Then, He looked at Ning Kaichun with a pair of bright and piercing eyes. If you have the guts, say it in front of the Empress. If she doesn't plaster you to the wall, consider it my loss. Ren Baqian dismissed Ning Kaichun with a few words. Recently, there really weren't any positions suitable for him. After all, with his status, there were many things that he couldn't do. Furthermore, there were already people who could do what he could. However, he really couldn't just leave a swordmaster here and ignore him. After a few more days, Ning Kaichun definitely wouldn't be able to stay here anymore. Ren Baqian pondered about where to place Ning Kaichun as he walked back. In the end, he was stopped halfway. Sir Ren, please come with me and say a few words. A middle-aged man and two young men came down from a carriage by the side of the road and called out to Ren Baqian. Ren Baqian sized them up and was slightly puzzled. Are you from Yun Nation? The people of Yun Nation looked similar to the people of Great Xia. However, they had always been known for their luxury and exquisite clothing. As a result, when Ren Baqian saw these three men in exquisite embroidered clothes, he immediately guessed their identities. Sir, my surname is Zhang, and I have met you once before. Today, I'm looking for you because I have an important matter to discuss with you. Sir, please come with me and let me say a few words. I have already prepared some food and wine in the restaurant next door. Ren Baqian looked at this man carefully and then at the two young men behind him. He didn't have any impression of them. However, he really wanted to hear what they had to say. Ren Baqian nodded to the people beside him. Zhuo Leng and the others immediately went around the inn and confirmed that there were no problems before going downstairs to report to Ren Baqian. It wasn't that he was being too careful. Anyone who had experienced a few assassinations in a year would be this careful. The two young men behind him lowered their heads and had a strange look on their faces. It wasn't clear whether it was contempt or something else, but they were careful not to let others notice. Ren Baqian walked upstairs under the escort of the guards and found a seat by the window to sit down. Under the watchful eyes of the guards, the three of them carefully sat opposite Ren Baqian. Sir Ren, the last time I saw you was a year ago. I think you already don't remember me. Ren Baqian thought about it. A year ago at this time, he should have just arrived in Dayo and was assigned by the Empress to be the Honglu deputy, in charge of receiving guests from various countries. Did the few of you attend Her Majesty's birthday celebration last year? Ren Baqian suddenly realized. At that time, he really couldn't remember many of them. Ning Kaichun, the seventh prince of Great Xia, and that kidney-deficient young master who vomited blood every time he made a move. These were the only people he could remember. He couldn't even remember the name and appearance of that young master from the Lin family whom he killed at that time, let alone the others. That's right. The middle-aged man nodded and smiled, following which he said, My surname is Zhang Junzheng. These are my two nephews, Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju. Greetings, Sir Ren. Just as Sir Ren thought, we are from the Yun Nation. As the middle-aged man spoke, he carefully sized up Ren Baqian and sighed deeply in his heart. At this time last year, this person in front of him was still a Honglu deputy in name. Not long after, he became the husband of Qi Zixiao. At that time, he didn't take Qi Zixiao seriously. After all, at that time, he didn't display any outstanding qualities. In everyone's hearts, he was just lucky to be chosen by Qi Zixiao. However, this luck could fall to the bottom at any time because of a slight change in Qi Zixiao's mind. In the eyes of many people, perhaps that was normal. After all, what kind of person was Qi Zixiao? He was an ordinary person with no talent and good luck. Even if Qi Zixiao liked him because of his flattery, how long could he last? Therefore, even though he and the others had been trying to build a relationship with Dayo for the past year, they didn't consider this person in front of them. This was the reason why. However, after a year, unexpectedly, this person's position had become more and more stable. This could be seen just from the attitude of the people in the imperial court toward him. Furthermore, there were rumors among the people that he played a great role in the war against Great Xia in the north. Furthermore, he produced salt in the mountains and recently went to Tianjing Basin with the Empress. Although he didn't know what he did, nearly 2,000 people from Tianjing Basin came to Lan City. He also had a few experts from the remnant citizens of the Han nation by his side as guards. Now, he had no choice but to put down his pride and reevaluate this person and beg him for help. Even Ren Bachien, who had always boasted of his superior foresight, had to admit that he had really misjudged this time. Ren Bachien's brain spun and finally felt that these three people in front of him were somewhat familiar. He then waited for them to speak and see what they wanted to say. They couldn't possibly be trying to persuade the Empress to give the Yun nation a way out through him, right? In history, there was no lack of cases of losing a direct confrontation and then bribing the opposing party's high-ranking officials to cause trouble in their own backyard. However, if they had this intention, they could be directly dragged down and beheaded. Chapter 570. Rinpochian wasn't in a hurry to reply. Instead, he picked up the teacup and smelled it before putting it back on the table. After taking a closer look at the three of them, he asked curiously, "You guys aren't ordinary people in the Yun nation, right? Although the Narita Zhang family isn't a big family, they do have some reputation." Zhang Junzheng was a little proud. In fact, not only did the Zhang family have a small reputation, but it was also quite famous. Many people in the Yun nation had always thought that controlling a city was the foundation of a family. However, although the Zhang clan did not control a city, the clan that controlled the city had changed several times over the past hundreds of years. But the Zhang clan had never fallen, and every generation had talent. It wasn't that the Zhang family didn't have the opportunity to control the city, but they gave up every time. According to the words of an elder of the Zhang clan, water had no form, and there was no way to attack it. From the Zhang clan's point of view, it might seem like they had a foothold in a city, but in reality, they were bound to it. Therefore, apart from being a family that did not attract much attention on the surface, most of the Zhang family members were scattered throughout various industries. The Narita Zhang family had always been a general name. On the surface, it looked like a plate of loose sand distributed in various industries. On the surface, they might not seem to be related, but at the root of it, they both came from the Narita Zhang family. Even if their enemies wanted to harm them, it would be difficult for them to do so. Zhang Juanjing's two nephews have been running into walls in Lan City for a year, and the war between Dayo and the Yun nation was in full swing. In his opinion, it was impossible for the Yun nation to win this war, so time was of the essence. In order to gain Rinpochian's attention, he briefly shared some information that wasn't easily known to others. Rinpochian was astonished by what he said. He didn't expect there to be such an aristocratic family in this world. According to Rinpochian's understanding of the Zhang family from Earth, it was similar to the Huizhou merchants. It was a general term of address, but it was still linked by bloodline. Why would you want to seek refuge with Dayo? Rinpochian asked with great interest. Other people avoided the Aboriginals, but the Zhang family took the initiative to approach them. This piqued his interest. The Rising Cloud Nation's monarch is young and frivolous, and all the important matters in the court are handled by Prime Minister Zheng Xingmian. Zheng Xingmian was obstinate, self-opinionated, and ambitious. Currently, the people in the imperial court were either trying to curry favor with him, or they were sent to prison, or they were resigning and returning home. In a few more years, the name of the country's monarch would probably change. If that was all, it would be fine. However, Zheng Xingmian was greedy and lustful. He had great ambition, but little talent. To tell you the truth, even in the face of a war with your country, the imperial court is still rejecting dissidents. This is evident. What does that have to do with you? Why don't you seek refuge with him? Rinpochian asked. No matter what the imperial court did, a clan like the Zhang clan should have a way to deal with it. He didn't believe that he would run over to the Aboriginals just because he couldn't stand the sight of the demons and monsters in the imperial court. It's a long story. Zheng Xingmian has great ambitions but little talent. He is not a good person. He has always had enmity with our Zhang family, and he knows a lot about our Zhang family. Although everything is fine now, the safety of the thousands of people in my Zhang family cannot be placed on this. So I have no choice but to do this. When Rinpochian heard this, he understood most of it. The Zhang family was afraid that Zhang Xingyan would attack them, so they were looking for a way out. Ordinary people might not know much about the Zhang family, but the Zhang family had been the Yun nation for hundreds of years. They had existed even before the founding of the Yun nation, so there were still people who knew about their roots. It was impossible for those large clans to not know anything about the Zhang family, but they just didn't fully understand them. Zhang Xingyan probably knew a lot about the Zhang family. There was a saying that went, "The person who understands you the most is your enemy." However, the Zhang family seemed to be overthinking things. Whether it was the Yun nation or Zhang Xingyan, they were probably going to vanish into thin air. "What can you do?" Rinpochian asked unhurriedly. "My Zhang family is involved in all walks of life, which is what your country lacks the most. I'm sure that the Zhang family will be of some use to you." Zhang Junzheng laughed. He was very confident in the strength of the Zhang family. "What you know, I know as well. I know everything that you don't." Rinpochian laughed nonchalantly with a hint of playfulness in his tone. "Sir, no one is omnipotent." Zhang Junzheng laughed and suddenly felt a little strange. This person's achievements over the past year and the establishment of the Black Bamboo Academy shouldn't be an ignorant person. How could he dare to say such a thing? One had to know that being involved in all walks of life was the foundation of the Zhang family's survival and also the source of their confidence. As long as someone from the Zhang family was still alive, they would be able to find a way out no matter where they were. Indeed, no one is omnipotent. However, I should be omnipotent to you, Rinpochian said bluntly. The things of the Zhang family were very important to others and even more important to the previous Dayo. However, with Rinpochian around, those things were nothing. He could obtain more advanced and scientific manufacturing techniques, industrial systems, and various management methods than the Zhang family. Although it might not necessarily be in line with the situation in this world, Rinpochian believed that he could completely change Dayo as long as he was given time. The Zhang family was naturally useful, but it wasn't as useful as they thought. The biggest use for Rinpochian was to save time. Therefore, these people could be used, but he still had to suppress them. After hearing Rinpochian's words, Zhang Junzheng looked slightly unhappy. The two young men behind him looked at Rinpochian with disdain. No matter who it was that was looked down upon, they wouldn't be able to stay calm. Not to mention a family like the Zhang family. The person in front of them was directly labeled as frivolous, shallow, and didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. The Zhang family is indeed looking for a way out, but it's not just Dayo. It's just that Great Xia is deeply rooted in all aspects. If the Zhang family were to move there, it would easily cause a backlash from the local forces. Therefore, Zhang Junzheng, who had the best foresight in the family, was inclined to move a portion of the family to Dayo. However, they had already hit a brick wall previously. If this person was such a shallow person, then there was no need for him to come to Dayo. Rinpochian looked at the expressions of the three people and realized that it was completely within his expectations. "I've already made salt. I don't know if you have heard of glass cups and mirrors. I can also make your pancreas, and I can make it even better. I call it nada perfumed soap. I can also make wine, and the taste is better than yours, and the taste is stronger. Spices? Soy sauce. Soy sauce. I could do all of these. Essence? I can also do this. Wrought iron? Forging weapons? I can also do all of these, and they're more advanced than yours. I know a little about farming equipment, and even how to farm. Clothes? Textiles? I could do all of these. In addition to history, I can also do mathematics, investigation, military strategy, poetry, and local governance. What else do you know? Tell me. Let me see if there's anything I don't know." Rinpochian chuckled and spoke with great confidence. Zhuo Lung and the others, who were following him, were speechless and didn't know if it was true or not. After all, they had only followed Rinpochian for a short period of time. They believed that Rinpochian knew the art of war and knew how to govern a country. After all, some of the things that Rinpochian did vaguely had the shadow of the art of war. The rearguard commandery was also formulated by Rinpochian. From recruitment to promotion, confidentiality, and rewards and punishments, the regulations were quite comprehensive. Ordinary people couldn't do it all. Zhuolong and the others also deeply believed that Ren Baqian was proficient in this area. As for other aspects, they weren't sure. However, after hearing what he said, they felt that it was a little exaggerated. Needless to say, the three people from the Zhang family didn't believe it at first. Towards the end, their expressions became very strange, as if they were looking at a lunatic talking in his sleep. In any industry, a person might not be able to reach the peak in his lifetime. Do you know all of them? Chapter 571. In that case, it seems that Dayo isn't a place for the Zhang family. Sorry for disturbing you today. We will take our leave now, Zhang Junzheng said faintly as he suppressed the anger in his heart. He originally thought that the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy was a wise person since he was able to secure his position in such a short period of time and establish an academy. Now, he only felt that he was an arrogant person. It was obvious that he wasn't an aboriginal. Perhaps he had learned some things from somewhere else, or perhaps he had developed this kind of arrogance after interacting with the aboriginals because of their stupidity. Therefore, he was an arrogant person. Such a person wasn't a good choice. No hurry. Seeing that the three of them were about to get up, Ren Baqian gestured with his hand, and the guards immediately pressed them down on the chairs. Among the three of them, only Zhang Junzheng was an earth wheel expert. The other two were man wheel experts, so they naturally didn't have the strength to resist the palace guards. Zhang Junzheng was even angrier. Since you've already said so, why can't we leave? Sir Ren, what other instructions do you have? Since we are useless to Sir Ren and Dayo, why not let us leave? Zhang Junzheng's voice was slightly cold. It's not that the Zhang family can't establish a foothold in Dayo, but your expectations are too high. To those who have never seen brass, brass can naturally be sold as gold, but not to me. If I did so, I would become a great laughingstock. If the Zhang family can live a stable life in Dayo, it won't be a problem. It can even be like how you live in the Yun Nation, Ren Baqian said with a smile. Ren Baqian said with a smile. He already knew what the Zhang family was thinking after listening to the beginning. He needed some manpower, but he didn't want them to think too highly of themselves. Since Sir Ren is here, why do you need us? No, although I can do everything, I'm just one person with limited energy. I still need some manpower. You can also learn something from me as the foundation of the Zhang family, Ren Baqian said without any trace of politeness. Zhang Junzheng almost laughed when he heard this. I wonder what Sir Ren can teach the Zhang family. Zhang Junzheng emphasized the word teach. As for Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju behind him, they were not as calm as he was. If it weren't for the guards holding them down, they would have already jumped up. But even so, a layer of ice still scraped off his face. In that case, why don't we take a gamble? You can choose 3, 5, or 7 industries or manufacturing methods to compete. As long as I lose one, it will be considered my loss. I will introduce you to His Majesty and guarantee that His Majesty will not behead you. How about that? When Zhang Junzheng heard what Rinpoche said, he wasn't happy. Instead, he was angry. The other party was simply too arrogant, allowing him to choose as many as he wanted to compete, and if he lost even one, it would be considered his loss. What kind of courage did he need to say that? Did they really think that there was no one in the Zhang clan? One had to know that the Zhang family's roots were not in the imperial court, nor were they in any line of business. Instead, the Zhang family shadow could be seen in most of the hundreds of lines of business in the Yun Nation. Furthermore, the Zhang family had grasped the core of the business. It can be said that in the Yun Nation, except for a very small number of things that are in the hands of certain families, there is nothing that the Zhang family doesn't touch. Although this kind of Zhang family wasn't widely known in the outside world, it was only because the Zhang family had always followed this method to continue the family line. Even if they encountered a great disaster, there would still be a day when they would rise again. However, this didn't mean that the Zhang family didn't have the strength. Sir Run, since you have put it this way, I would be guilty if I were to decline. There's no need for too many, just 3. Zhang Junzheng sneered. He couldn't even be bothered to ask what the other party's conditions were if he lost. Don't you want to challenge a few more? Is 3 enough? Rinpoche naturally didn't care. Whether it was 3 or 30, it didn't make any difference to him. 3 is enough, Zhang Junzheng said proudly. If he couldn't beat this person in front of him in 3 categories, then the Zhang family would be too incompetent. Furthermore, he was certain that he would win, as long as you think it's enough. If you lose, you'll have to move the Zhang family over to Dayo to assist me and learn well. If you want to run away, you should know about the 9 pavilions, Rinpoche said unhurriedly. The Zhang family naturally won't do such a thing. Keeping our word is the foundation of the Zhang family, Zhang Junzheng said. Furthermore, we won't lose, Zhang Junzheng added resolutely. It's best to have confidence. Rinpoche smiled and didn't say it out loud. He wanted to say that ignorance limited their imagination. The time will be set in 1 month. As for what the bet is, I will inform you when the time comes, Zhang Junzheng said. In the end, he was still a little cautious. He was afraid that the Aboriginals would capture craftsmen from the Yun Nation if he told them what the bet was. As long as he didn't say anything, the Aboriginals couldn't possibly capture craftsmen from all walks of life, right? Furthermore, there were many things that a craftsman couldn't know all of. For example, cloth dyeing, red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. A craftsman might not necessarily know all of them. Therefore, as long as he informed the other party before the competition, the possibility of the other party cheating was eliminated. In that case, the Zhang family definitely wouldn't lose. Inform me when you are ready, Rinpoche said unhurriedly, got up, nodded at the other party, and walked down the restaurant with his guards. As for the food and wine, it was just a pretense, and he wasn't in the mood to eat. On the contrary, he was somewhat happy to meet such a family of fools. If everything went smoothly, he would be able to earn a batch of skilled workers. If the other party went back on their words, he would just kill them all after conquering the Yun Nation. After Rinpoche left, Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju angrily said, "This person is too arrogant. Fifth uncle, are we really going to compete with him?" Zhang Junzheng snorted. A competition is naturally a competition, and we can also let them see the capabilities of the Zhang family. As for what happens next, it will depend on Qi Zixiao. Qi Zixiao is the ruler of a nation after all, and he has his own plans. No matter what excuse he comes up with, he won't be easily deceived in the face of victory and defeat. However, Dayo isn't a good place after all. When the time comes, we will split into 2 groups, one toward Great Xia and the other toward Dayo, Zhang Junzheng said as he pondered. Rinpoche returned to the palace, sat in the garden with the Empress, and jokingly told her about what happened just now. It's really unexpected to meet someone who wants to compete in these things. It's quite interesting. Rinpoche chuckled. The Empress rolled her eyes at him and said, "You went to see Li Fu, but you caused such trouble. Li Fu is nothing. He has a really good temper. As for the Zhang family, they're all skilled workers who can understand many things easily. It's also easy for them to do things." Rinpoche had already determined the other party's identity. "Aren't you afraid that others will learn from you?" The Empress asked. Back then, when Dayo wanted to learn from other countries, the 3 emperors of Dayo remembered how the other countries blocked their technology and knowledge. It was still very difficult for the Empress to let go of this aspect. It doesn't matter if they learn something. After all, what they learn is from the past, and it's all related to the people's livelihood. The real core is still in science and technology. Furthermore, with them, it will be easier to occupy the Yun Nation, Rinpoche said. There is too much knowledge on Earth, so much that he could squander it at will. Naturally, he wouldn't care. Furthermore, a person's energy was limited. No matter how much knowledge he could obtain, it would be useless if he didn't have the energy to do it. Furthermore, the other party also had an important role. After conquering the Yun Nation, they could play a significant role in pacifying the people and serve as a role model. I promised to send a batch of secret manuals to the Messier 87, but I've been busy these days and didn't have the time, Rinpoche said. Although he had already returned to Lan City, he was still remotely commanding the rearguard commandery and couldn't let go for a short period of time. He even spent less time admiring the flowers in the garden with the Empress. Chapter 572. Qingxin Palace Hall. Nothing seemed to have changed here. There were only 2 people in the huge hall. One of them was Librarian Lin, who had a fake cough, and the other was Lin Xiaola, who was always sleeping. When Ren Baqian walked into the courtyard, he saw Lin Xiaola lying on her back, sleeping soundly and basking in the sun. Compared to when he first saw her, she seemed to be more daring. Back then, she had always been sleeping in Qingxin Palace Hall and would get a shock every time someone came. But now, not only was she openly lying in the courtyard, but she was also unshakable. Ren Baqian walked around her and pushed open the door of Qingxin Palace Hall. After walking a dozen steps, he opened the door on the left and saw piles of secret manuals. Speaking of which, the harvest from this trip to Tianjing Basin wasn't small. Finally, he searched the rebellious sects and warlords' residences. After counting the gold, silver, and jewelry, he found at least 100,000 taels of gold, which was equivalent to 1,000,000 taels of silver. The Empress's annual income from the gold mine was only 120,000 taels of silver. 1,000,000 taels of silver was already a huge sum for Dayo. Unfortunately, this income eventually went to the national treasury. The secret manuals in this house belonged to the Empress. There were more than 13,000 secret manuals. Excluding the duplicates, there were at least 6,000 of them. There are different levels of people, and so were the secret manuals. If they were classified according to the high, middle, and low levels, 80% of them could be classified as relatively shallow, 18% as intermediate, and close to 2% as high level. Less than 0.1% of the secret manuals were top-notch. For example, the treasures of the 8 major sects could be classified as top-notch. In addition, there were other miscellaneous things such as face-changing. At first, Rinpoche was rather interested in it, but after looking at it carefully, he realized that it wasn't much different from modern makeup. It was just that due to the materials used, the makeup would last longer on the face. It wasn't like in novels where a human skin mask would immediately change one's identity. There were also some methods of making medicine. The secret methods of taming snakes, insects were elephants, monkeys, and birds, as well as some other miscellaneous things. One of the small sects had an interesting formula called the marching pill. If it was made according to the formula, the size of a fingernail would be enough to feed an ordinary person a meal. Even for Aboriginal warriors, the size of half a fist would be enough. With this thing, a soldier could carry half a month to a month's worth of rations at a time. They could completely abandon the heavy logistics and long-distance raids. The only problem was that many of the ingredients were produced in the 60,000 mountains, and there weren't many of them. They were expensive, so it was difficult to promote them to the entire army. They still needed the medical bureau to find something to replace them. Rinpoche picked out more than 500 low-level secret manuals, 50 middle-level secret manuals, and 3 high-level secret manuals. The next step was to convert these secret manuals into simplified characters. The ancients once said, "When there is a problem, the disciple will help. When there is wine and food, the teacher will serve." Is this filial piety? The ancients also said, "A filial son who has deep love must be amiable. Amiable must be pleasing. Pleasing must be graceful. Pleasing must be gracious. Pleasing must be gracious. Pleasing must be gracious." When it is time to tell a story, the only thing that is difficult to listen to is lust. Serving is not enough to be filial. What it meant was, if there's a problem, the disciple will do it. There was wine and meat for teacher to eat. Furthermore, the disciple had to be amiable and happy. Even if you didn't do it happily, that wouldn't be filial. The next day, Rinpoche gave them homework with a smile on his face. From today onwards, each of you will take 12 secret manuals back and convert them into simplified characters. Write one and hand in one. If there are any mistakes, do you see the flagpole outside? I will let you flutter in the wind and let loose. If you don't finish writing, not only will you flutter in the wind for a day, but you will also receive bullets. When a student from the Black Bamboo Academy heard this and looked at the stacks of secret manuals that Rinpoche asked people to move into the room, their faces turned green. Each of them had to be responsible for 12 secret manuals for 7 days. In addition, they had to attend classes in the morning. As a result, the lights in every student's room remained lit every night. 7 days later, 49 students with panda eyes and gritted teeth stacked the secret manuals in one room. 7 days. During these 7 days, everyone slept less than 4 hours a day. After 7 days, they began to doubt their lives. The only good thing was that after 7 days, their simplified Chinese characters were even better than Rinpoche's. After all, he had been using a computer for so long that he almost couldn't write. 3 days off. All of you have read about the steam engine in physics class. After 3 days, you will start learning how to build the steam engine. Rinpoche smiled as he took back more than 500 secret manuals and gave everyone 3 days off. It was time to build the steam engine. The steam engine could be said to be the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Although the technology in this world hadn't developed to this stage, it would be very fast with its own impetus. After the steam engine was built and had its own thrust, the development of technology would take a leap forward in a short period of time. After hearing this, everyone directly lay on the table and didn't even have the energy to cheer. Their brains were almost emptied, and the steam engine was no longer in their consideration. That night, Rinpoche returned to Earth with the secret manuals. The 6 winged cavalry warriors and the tutor, Ding Jie, were drinking there. The 6 of them were mainly drinking, and Ding Jie was holding a glass of water and slurping it. 2 of them were bragging about how they had experienced storms and rainbows, while the other 4 looked envious. Rinpoche grinned. Those 2 idiots. After he left, they went to look for a prostitute and ended up destroying her place. Then, they smashed her drug den. However, the physical fitness of these winged cavalry warriors was indeed too strong. Soft drugs like ecstasy and K powder basically had no effect on them. That's right, they smashed the drug den because the ecstasy and K powder sold to them weren't effective. They felt cheated. They didn't know what it was and only heard that it felt like they were flying after using it. Lady Boss. Seeing Rinpoche, the 6 tall and burly winged cavalry warriors stood up to greet him. Rinpoche picked up a decorative ornament and threw it at them. Boss. Only Ding Jie obediently called him boss. After all, an honest child was the most lovable. It's second boss. Rinpoche grunted, went upstairs to change his clothes, and called Yang Senator. He asked someone to move the secret manuals into the car and called a winged cavalry warrior to follow him out. When he arrived at the underground garage of the Messier 87 department, Yang Sun was already waiting there with his men. When he saw that the back seat and trunk were full of manuals, Yang Sun was immediately shocked. The members of the Messier 87 department behind Yang Sun all gasped in unison. Although Rinpoche had promised them before and had already called them in advance, he still didn't expect there to be so many. One had to know that these were cultivation manuals. They weren't cabbages. Previously, when Rinpoche sent them the original version of the secret manuals, they usually stored them in a safe. Although they knew that these things weren't very rare for Rinpoche, they were still shocked to see him pulling a car full of them, as if they were cabbages. Rinpoche was really generous this time. With these secret manuals, the deduction speed would be faster, and more types of martial arts could be deduced to suit different people. At the same time, they could better understand the cultivation system and the characteristics of each level through these secret manuals. When Rinpoche returned, he gave Ding Jie a secret manual that had been improved by the nation, which was the kind that Rinpoche had given to his parents. This is for you. This is easier to learn and won't cause problems, but remember, don't spread it. If it spreads, you know the consequences. You will harm him and yourself. Ding Jie had always felt regretful after Rinpoche stopped him from learning martial arts from the winged cavalry warriors. He would feel lost in bed at night, so it was a huge surprise to receive this secret manual from Rinpoche. Boss, I will definitely do my best. Chapter 573. The title of Aboriginal Barbarians was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. However, this was only because the Aboriginals didn't have the concept of science and technology. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were so strong that they could solve most of the problems in this world with force. Therefore, in other aspects, they would rarely think about it. Although the saying wasn't entirely correct, it explained a lot of the problem. Because they were lazy, they wanted to use tricks and came up with all kinds of labor-saving methods. This was the prototype of machinery. However, after a period of studying the foundation of science and technology, physics, the students of the Black Bamboo Academy were no longer the traditional Aboriginals who only had muscles in their brains. Although they hadn't made a steam engine with the little knowledge they had learned due to their lack of vision and experience, they had made a pressure cooker. Da-da-da. The ground in front of the row of students was splashed with mud. What I want is a steam engine. Can you make a pressure cooker for me in 12 days? Huh. Looking at Rinpoche, who was brandishing the 81 rifle, the students standing at the front were all smiling mischievously. Teacher, we are already halfway there. With the intake pipe, pistons, shunt box, connecting rods, and crank wheels, it will be a simple steam engine. Shurgan vowed. I don't believe you. Rinpoche was so angry that he almost laughed. Someone, hang all of them on the flagpoles. Let them flutter in the wind and find themselves. Rinpoche said angrily. Who dares to hang me? Tong Lan, the little Lolita, immediately exploded and jumped 10 feet high. Sir, we don't have enough poles. The guards looked at the 3 wooden pillars in the courtyard that were about 5 to 6 meters tall and felt a little awkward. Hang the rest of them on the wall. Rinpoche said hatefully. In less than 2 hours, Tong Lan, who had dark circles under her eyes, and a group of mischievous students were hanging on the wall of the academy. There were 3 pillars in the courtyard, and there were 6 people hanging on each pillar. Some of the palace guards who were passing by laughed out loud when they saw more than a dozen people hanging on the pillars and a row of people hanging on the wall. Rinpoche strolled back to the palace. The Empress had just finished her morning court session and casually asked him when she saw his dark face. After hearing what Rinpoche said, the Empress chuckled. You have to put some thought into teaching your students. The teacher who taught me back then was so angry that he smashed a table every day. He didn't expect the Empress to have such a dark history. However, when Rinpoche asked again, the Empress smiled and didn't answer. The Empress pointed at a row of wooden doors and said, we should change the paper windows in this hall to glass so that it will be brighter. After all, the transparency of window paper was much lower, and it was very easy to tear. If it was made of glass, the bedroom would not be so dark. The Empress had always disliked an empty and cold palace. She preferred a brighter place. I have already gotten someone to do it. It will be done in another 2 days. Rinpoche was successfully diverted by the Empress. The 2 of them walked around in the garden. Rinpoche plucked a small white flower and placed it in her hair bun. The Empress smiled and asked, outstanding. Rinpoche looked at the little white flower. Sure enough, it was that outstanding little white flower from back then. He immediately laughed. After walking around in the garden with the Empress, Rinpoche's mood immediately improved. Otherwise, he would be so angry that he would have a heart attack if he had to face those idiots every day. 2 days later, the glass that Rinpoche had instructed was ready, and they began to replace the paper windows in the bedroom. Fortunately, the original window frame was very thick, and the 6 millimeters thick glass could be placed inside. After that, a wooden strip was used to seal the back of the Empress's bedroom. Immediately, the Empress's bedroom became brighter, and people wouldn't feel bored inside. However, another problem arose. Ever since the glass windows were replaced, the temperature in the bedroom began to rise. Fortunately, the hall was deep and spacious enough. With the addition of ice and fans, the Empress wasn't affected much. The Empress was in a good mood for the next few days, especially at night. When the two of them had dinner in the palace and lit up a string of lanterns, the Empress's mood was exceptionally good. She was always smiling, unlike the cold and cheerless appearance she had in front of others. The two of them sat opposite each other in the depths of the palace and drank softly. It was rather heartwarming. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan felt this particularly deeply. In the past, the Empress was always cold and cheerless, and people didn't dare to get close to her. The Empress today was like a completely different person compared to a year ago. Even though she still looked cold and cheerless at other times, she was a little better than before and wouldn't get angry easily. With Principal Run by her side, the Empress smiled more often. Even if she didn't smile, her face wouldn't be cold. She gave off a much gentler vibe and was easier to get close to. After replacing the glass windows in the Empress's bedroom, the next step was the throne room. A few days later, when Tang Jingye went to court, he saw many people standing in front of the throne room whispering to each other. He was wondering if some unlucky fellow had offended the Empress and gotten whipped. As a result, he walked forward with his legs crossed, raised his head, and followed everyone's gaze. He was stunned. There were a total of 12 doors in the throne room. Usually, only 6 of them were open, and everyone couldn't be more familiar with them. However, at this moment, the paper windows on the 12 doors of the throne room had disappeared. What's going on? Tang Jingye was a little puzzled. Why did Her Majesty remove the paper windows? Could it be that it's so cool? Qin Xuan and Tang Jingye arrived one after the other. Seeing that everyone had stopped, they didn't stop. Instead, they walked forward with their legs crossed, stretched out their hands, and patted the originally empty paper windows. Crash! The main door was inlaid with a piece of glass. At this moment, it shattered into countless pieces and fell to the ground. Qin Xuan was dumbfounded. He looked at his hand and then at the door. This time, everyone finally discovered the problem. There's something on it. Is it crystal? It's worth a lot. I'm afraid Sir Qin is going to get beaten up. Where did so many large pieces of crystal come from? Furthermore, they're so thin that you can't see them if you don't look carefully. Is this the thing called glass that Principal Ren made? Tang Jingye immediately thought of the glass factory outside the city. However, that factory belonged to the imperial family, and he was only responsible for finding some craftsmen. He didn't know much about what happened after that, but he knew that it was making a transparent, crystal-like thing. After pondering for a while, Tang Jingye looked at Qin Xuan with evil intentions and laughed mischievously. Qin Xuan's face darkened when he heard everyone gloating over his misfortune. Sir Minister, you're amazing. Lian Liang from the Department of the Army gave a thumbs up. With a black face, Qin Xuan sent Lian Liang flying with a kick. A moment later, the Empress entered the door and discovered that the glass had been broken less than a day after it was installed. She immediately raised the corner of her eyes and emitted a murderous aura. Then, the culprit, Qin Xuan, was sent flying out of the throne room by the Empress with a kick. A few days later, another glass shop opened in Lan City for the imperial family, and it was immediately overcrowded. P.S. Follow the official WeChat account. Limiox is 666. Chapter 574. The originally bustling Jingyang Street had become a lot more desolate after half a year of war, especially after Great Xia, the Yin Nation, and the Qin Nation cut off the trade routes to Dayo. Most of the salt, wine, and cloth shops that used to be the most popular were closed. Most of the pedestrians were in a hurry or went to the shops and restaurants opened by the aboriginals. Only when the government started selling salt every once in a while would this street become lively. However, in the past few days, this area of the street was filled with people. Not only did the high officials of the court frequently come and go, but many pedestrians also stopped here. From afar, one could see a sign that said Imperial Glass hanging in the middle of the area. Zhang Junzheng, Zhang Heqi, and Zhang Heju were watching from afar, but they couldn't see clearly because there were so many people in front of them. Zhang Heqi pointed to the front and said, Fifth uncle, it's there. You said that it's filled with transparent glassware. I remember that there were aboriginals peddling similar goods in the country half a year ago. Later, they were robbed by the warlord of Qingfeng City, Yiku. A month later, Yiku's entire family was wiped out, and the glassware was taken back. According to what you said, those glassware are cheap. I don't understand why they came all the way here just to snatch these things back, Zhang Junjing said doubtfully. He would never have imagined that when Rinpochian saw the things that Hong Bao snatched back, he felt like 10,000 alpacas were running and jumping in his heart. At that time, Rinpochian felt like kicking Hong Bao to death. Rinpochian asked them to plunder other people's treasure troves, even if it was just some silver. In the end, after running around, they managed to snatch back the glasses and mirrors that had been stolen. Later, Rinpochian weighed his and Hong Bao's fighting strength and gave up resentfully. However, he felt even more depressed when he saw Hong Bao's expression of wanting to take credit for the good stuff. Zhang Junzheng and his nephew squeezed through the crowd. If the three of them didn't have some martial skills, they wouldn't even be able to squeeze into the outer circle. Zhang Junzheng was an earth wheel expert, but he was almost pushed across the street by someone. The three of them didn't dare to get angry. There were quite a few aboriginal commoners in the crowd who were equivalent to an earth wheel expert. Zhang Junzheng thought about how his earth wheel level was already considered a big shot in the Yun Nation. Here, even a commoner might not be a match for him. The aboriginals' talent in martial arts was too enviable. Fortunately, they weren't that smart. This was a case of every advantage having its drawbacks. The three of them squeezed to the front with great difficulty and saw that there were still a few guards in front of the shop, mainly to prevent these people from breaking the glass windows. If there was no one watching, Qin Chuan would be the first, but he definitely wouldn't be the last. The three of them stood in front of the crowd and looked at the shop in front of them, clicking their tongues. The wooden boards on both sides of the shop were removed and replaced with 8 doors. Each door was divided into 6 grids, and the center of the grids was completely transparent. If one didn't pay attention, they wouldn't even notice that there was a layer of transparent, crystal-like material on top. Light shone through that layer of glass into the shop, making it extremely bright inside. There weren't many people in the shop, only a few dozen. One could see the inside of the shop from the door. The shelves against the wall were filled with crystal-like products, cups, plates, bowls, and boxes. They were dazzling under the illumination of more than a dozen luminous pearls on the wall. Are these the glass that this shop sells? Zhang Junzheng asked. It's simply ingenious workmanship. I really don't know how they made it. Furthermore, the price is so cheap. A glass cup only costs 10 taels of silver. Even 100 taels of silver can be sold, right? Zhang Heqi, who had been here once before, said incredulously. This was the first time he saw someone selling something that could be sold at a high price at a low price. They aren't selling it cheap in the Yun Nation. A crystal cup costs 500 taels of silver. It seems like the cost of this kind of glass is very low. That principal run is still quite capable, Zhang Junzheng said faintly. Fifth uncle, about the bet. Zhang Heju asked softly. Don't worry, the people are already on their way. They're the best craftsmen in the Zhang family. Zhang Junjing's lips moved slightly, and an extremely weak voice was transmitted to the two of them. A moment later, as people started to come out, the three of them were let in. After entering the shop, the three of them felt a cooling sensation. They saw ice basins filled with ice cubes placed in the corners of the shop. Nowadays, there were dozens of shaved ice shops in Lawn City, so ice wasn't rare anymore. The three of them didn't pay too much attention to it and focused all their attention on the glassware on the shelves. How much does this cost? Zhang Junzheng saw a set of transparent teapots and teacups. He was extremely happy and asked the people in the shop. 800 taels. A lady in the shop glanced at him and said, So expensive? Zhang Junzheng was astonished. A transparent cup costs 10 taels, yet this set of tea set costs 800 taels? How much does this cup cost? Zhang Junzheng pointed at a cup and asked, 150 taels. The lady replied. Following her words, the rest of the people in the shop turned to look at the cup and were somewhat astonished. They've taken advantage of us so many times in the past. It's time to return some of it. The Empress thought of those hateful foreign merchants in the past. She then thought about how they would pinch their noses and buy things at high prices in the future. She immediately felt great. Yes, you have to pay for what you have done. Rinpoche laughed as well. Even if they don't use glass, they still have mirrors, soap, clocks. They will spit out the money however they eat. The Empress thought about it and felt disgusted by his words. She pinched his ear with one hand and twisted it. P.S. Follow the WeChat official account. Limiox's 666. Chapter 575. Jing Street was a brand new neighborhood that was inhabited by the Jing tribe people from Tianjin Basin. Except for a few who were sent to the glass factory and the imperial palace to take care of the gardens, the rest of them were settled here. The most eye-catching person in Jing Street was the world's #1 expert, Li Fu. On the way here, not many people knew about him, but after arriving here, there were court officials coming to challenge him every day, so it was impossible not to know him. However, the person with the highest status in the hearts of these Jing tribe people wasn't Li Fu, but Qinyan Sword. After all, Li Fu wasn't a Jing tribe person, and the country and race didn't mean anything to him. He would only make a move when someone disturbed him. If he was annoyed, he would go to the Black Bamboo Academy to urge Rinpoche or find trouble with him. After a long time, he felt that it was quieter there. When he had nothing to do, he rarely stayed at Jing Street. Most of the time, he would find a place near Black Bamboo Academy to sleep or sit outside the guest hall in a daze, listening to the things that he did not understand. Qinyan Sword was completely different. He was a pure Jing tribe person and was an expert in the rebel army 70 years ago. Even though he lived in seclusion for many years, he never gave up. Zhuo Chang stayed in Gu City to oversee things, and as one of the 2 spirit wheel experts in Tianjin Basin, Qinyan Sword became the guardian of all the Jing tribe people here. During this month in Lan City, everyone knew Qinyan Sword's name and respected him from the bottom of their hearts. Today, another 3 people were injured outside the street. The one who did it was a barbarian commoner. The Public Order Bureau's people are always the last to arrive, an old man said as he sat in front of Qinyan Sword. His face was filled with dissatisfaction. Did the Public Order Bureau arrest that person? Qinyan Sword wasn't too surprised because this wasn't the first time such an incident had happened in the past month. They arrested him and released him after 3 lashes, the old man replied. Qinyan Sword nodded. The Public Order Bureau was definitely biased towards the Aboriginals. This was often the case in the past. Sometimes, when Rinpoche interfered, the situation would be better. However, it wasn't much better since he couldn't always stay here to guard. Even Qinyan Sword could understand the situation when the Aboriginals were biased towards the Aboriginals. He still did what he promised us, but to achieve what we want, we still have to take it slow. Qinyan Sword comforted. I understand. But in just 1 month, over 100 people have been injured, more than 10 have been seriously injured, and 1 has even died. I'm always angry. There are still more than 10 million people in Tianjin Basin. We have to endure for them, Qinyan Sword said. He paid some attention and found that not only were there a lot fewer people coming to celebrate the Empress's birthday, but there were basically none. In fact, he wanted to see if there were any gigolos who dared to hit on the Empress this year. As it turned out, those guys still knew what was good and bad. At least, they knew that the Empress was taken, which gave him a sense of accomplishment. The Empress didn't even raise her head and said, "This year after the war with Great Xia, the Yun Nation and the Chen Nation, who would dare to come?" In any case, in her heart, the only value of celebrating the Empress's birthday was to receive a lot of valuable things to exchange for weapons. She didn't care about those people at all. "What gift do you want, Your Majesty?" Rinpoche laughed. "Are you asking me?" The Empress raised her head and glanced at him. "Even if it's a moon in the sky. Although I can't pluck it, I can take a photo for you." Rinpoche was kicked out of the carriage just as he finished speaking. After a while, Renbachien returned to the carriage, sat in front of the Empress, and continued to play cards with a serious face. However, he still had to carefully prepare for the Empress's birthday. Last year, Hongwu gave him a jade embryo. He couldn't get such a treasure, but he had to be able to move the Empress. After the group returned to Lan City, Renbachien continued to devote himself to making the steam engine. During this period, Li Fu spent more and more time in Black Bamboo Academy. Renbachien began to ponder how to trick Li Fu into becoming a sweeping monk. With Li Fu's strength, it would be a waste if he wasn't a sweeping monk. One had to know that the three most legendary occupations were the old guard, the sweeping monk, and the librarian. Renbachien was determined to build Black Bamboo Academy into the world's top educational institution. At that time, even an old sweeping monk would be the world's #1 expert. That would be the style of the world's #1 educational institution. Unfortunately, Li Fu scoffed at Renbachien's deception. Although he had a good character, he wasn't fooled. Right now, he just wanted to watch Renbachien make his hot air balloon and rocket as soon as possible. Chapter 576. This time, it was at a restaurant on Jingyang Street. Sir Ren, the people from the Zhang family are here. The competition can begin at any time. Zhang Junzheng cupped his hands. Let's do it in 2 days then. What do you want to compete with? Renbachien was fiddling with a small box in his hand. He took a deep breath, opened his mouth, and spat out a mist with the fragrance of fruits. Even his face couldn't be seen clearly. It was as if he was a spirit from a supernatural story that was puffing clouds and spitting out mist. This made Zhang Junzheng and the other two stare at the box in Renbachien's hand. Sir Run, may I ask what this is? Zhang Junzheng couldn't help but ask curiously. A small thing. We call it steam cigarettes. Renbachien fiddled with the box in his hand and placed it on the table. In fact, this kind of thing had existed on Earth for a long time, but he hadn't paid much attention to it. Once on his way back, someone passed by smoking this kind of thing. At that time, he felt that it was quite fragrant, so he went to a steam cigarette shop to have a look. Then he felt that the ice-cold, fruit-scented tobacco oil in this steam cigarette was simply too comfortable. Especially in a hot place like Dayo, one puff made his throat and lungs feel cold, and his mouth was filled with the sweet and fragrant taste of the fruit. After a few days, he couldn't bear to part with this thing. Zhang Junzheng didn't know what Renbachien meant after hearing the name. He looked at it a few more times before looking back at Renbachien and asked, Sir Run, is the bet still the same as before? Of course. If I lose, I will introduce you to Her Majesty and guarantee it. If you lose, the entire Zhang family will move to Dayo to make a name for themselves. They can also learn from me. Speaking of which, you have made a huge profit. Renbachien emphasized the entire Zhang family. No matter how one looked at it, the Zhang family had indeed made a huge profit. The Yun nation was on the verge of capsizing. If they hadn't found Renbachien at this time, they wouldn't have received such treatment when the Yun nation was destroyed. Not to mention, they could learn something from Renbachien. Even if it was just some production techniques, it would be enough to benefit the Zhang family. Zhang Junzheng didn't comment on this and said, there must always be a witness to the competition. Her Majesty will be the witness. Renbachien laughed. The other party had set the time for the competition at this time because they wanted to make a name for themselves during the Empress's birthday celebration. Zhang Junjing smiled. With the Empress as a witness, this competition was the best opportunity to showcase the strength of the Zhang family. The 3 segments of the competition aren't complicated. However, it was not easy to do these 3 things well. The first round is dyeing cloth. There are 7 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. We are competing on durability and not fading. After all, it was not easy to dye a durable fabric that did not fade easily. Although each dyeing house had their own methods, there were differences in the results. This was also a very direct way to determine the winner and loser. The reason why he didn't mention the purity of the color was because there was no standard for the purity of the color. It depended entirely on the individual's preference. This could be faked, but the degree of fading could not be faked. After entering the water, he could wash it with his pancreas, and it would be easy to distinguish. Another reason was that dyeing the cloth would take at least half a month. The Zhang family had a special method to dye the cloth in a short period of time, but the color wouldn't be as good as the cloth that was dyed in half a month. Therefore, Zhang Junzheng was very confident in this competition. It would be pretty good if the other party could dye the cloth in such a short period of time. After speaking, he carefully looked at Ren Baqian's expression and felt a little disappointed when he saw that Ren Baqian didn't have any reaction. He didn't know if the other party was really confident or simply didn't understand the difficulties involved. The second segment is to make springs. Zhang Junzheng paused for a while before continuing. Springs? Ren Baqian pondered over these two words. He didn't expect the Zhang family to actually know how to make springs. This was a little unexpected. Twisting a spring in one's hand required a lot of strength. He had always thought that Great Xia's crossbow battalion used springs, but later discovered that they were multi-strung and fired a row of arrows at a time. As a result, he had never had any expectations for the spring technology of this world. The biggest problem with springs was the material, which was the biggest problem that limited the development of springs. Since the Zhang family had brought it up, they must have a certain standard in this area and might have unique materials. Not bad. This is a spring. As for what this thing is used for, Sir Ren, please forgive me for keeping you in suspense. We will be competing on the tension and elasticity of the spring, Zhang Junzheng said confidently as he placed a fist-sized torsion spring on the table. This was the latest technology from the Yun Nation. The ballistas used on the battlefield in the Yun Nation were made of this kind of torsion spring. Although he knew that Ren Baqian had a small explosive device, he believed that a ballista that could fire 100 bolts at a time and had a range of 200 steps would definitely interest Qi Zixiao. Ren Baqian looked at the torsion spring on the table. Although he already knew that this would be the result of technology, he still didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw how confident the other party was. Competing with modern technology in alloys and springs. Who gave you such confidence? However, Ren Baqian valued the Zhang family even more. Being able to make a spring that met a certain standard was enough to prove the value of the Zhang family's craftsmen. What's the third segment? Ren Baqian asked faintly as he placed the spring on the table. Brewing wine. Sir Ren said that he knew how to brew wine, and the Zhang family also has a certain level of knowledge in brewing wine. We will use the same type of wine as the base, process it again, and compete to see how strong the wine is, Zhang Junzheng said again. In fact, the most important part of this competition was the spring. He was well aware of the difficulty of making this kind of spring. Even the materials used were brought over from the Yun Nation. He believed that Ren Baqian definitely wouldn't be able to do it. As for the other things, they were just extras, but they weren't meaningless. For example, brewing wine. Qi Zixiao had always loved the spirits of the Yun Nation. Every time a caravan from Dayo came to the Yun Nation, they would purchase a lot of good wine. The best wine in the Yun Nation was made by the Zhang family's craftsmen. He believed that brewing wine alone was enough to make Qi Zixiao happy. The torsion spring and ballistas were of great use to the whole of Dayo. Whether it was for public or private reasons, the things that he used for this competition were enough to stabilize the Zhang family in Dayo. Not only that, in order to prevent Dayo from having other ideas, all the craftsmen who came this time were prepared to die and took poison in advance. This also cut off the possibility of Dayo obtaining these production methods from them. Ren Baqian would never allow the Zhang family's technology to be leaked. This was because this was the foundation of their future foothold in Dayo. So be it. The competition will begin in 2 days. Do you have any other requirements? We need a courtyard that is divided into 2 parts. Only materials can be transported in, and we are not allowed to see each other's production methods. We can only compete with the final product. Does Sir Ren agree? Although these techniques couldn't be learned at a glance, and there were many unique techniques and formulas, Zhang Junzheng still maintained sufficient vigilance for fear of the possibility of the technology being leaked. Ren Baqian thought about it. and felt that he had nothing to say. He originally had the intention of bullying them. Now that the other party was full of confidence and had pushed the entire Zhang family into a pit, what else could he say? He took a deep breath of the steam and spat out a mouthful of smoke. Chapter 577. The competition with the Zhang family was decided by Ren Baqian and the Empress. The Empress had never interfered in such matters. After all, she knew nothing about craftsmen. In fact, in her opinion, Ren Baqian was enough. The technology on Earth was enough for Dayo to absorb. Although she hoped to see such a grand occasion sooner, she knew that many things had to be done step by step. Therefore, she let Ren Baqian do it. After informing the Empress, Ren Baqian greeted Tang Jinya. In the end, Tang Jinya only watched as Ren Baqian puffed out mouthfuls of smoke from the beginning to the end. After Ren Baqian finished speaking, Tang Jinya snatched the steam cigarette and asked how it was used. He didn't mind Ren Baqian's saliva and took a big gulp. Then he coughed violently. A large amount of steam rushed into his lungs. This impact made it difficult for Tang Jinya to adapt to, but he refused to let go after a while. He liked this kind of thing that could show off. Seeing this, Ren Baqian could only spread his hands. In any case, this thing had already been eaten by Tang Jinya, and he didn't want it anymore. Sure enough, early the next morning, Tang Jinya was already waiting outside the palace. He held Ren Baqian's steam cigarette in his hand and puffed out clouds of mist. Not long after, it was as if he was surrounded by clouds of mist and couldn't even be seen clearly. Another morning, outside a house in the east of the city, Zhang Junzheng and Ren Baqian met. Both of them smiled, and the content of their smiles was roughly the same. Ren Baqian and the Empress came out of the palace at the same time, but Ren Baqian was one step ahead. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the Empress arrived in front of the house accompanied by a group of guards. Behind her were Tang Jinya, Shi Qing, and a few others. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Commoner Zhang Junzheng, Zhang Heqi, Zhang Heju, greets the Empress of Dayo. Sitting in the carriage, the Empress looked at Zhang Junzheng and his nephew, nodded slightly, and asked coldly, "Are you from the Zhang family?" Last year, the three of them gave her a generous gift, but she had completely forgotten about it. "Yes, I am." "Yes, do well in the future. Dayo is going to change, and there will be a place for all of you to use your skills." The Empress nodded. Ever since she went to Earth, she had been paying more and more attention to the craftsmen. The development of Earth had proven the usefulness of craftsmen. "We will definitely work hard." Zhang Junzheng was overjoyed. It seemed like Qi Zixiao valued the Zhang clan very much. Otherwise, with her personality, she wouldn't have said such a thing. Furthermore, what did he mean by Dayo was going to change? The Empress simply said a few words and alighted from the carriage. Accompanied by everyone, she walked around the residence. This was originally the residence of a great Xiao merchant, but at this moment, the head of that merchant had already been chopped off. Naturally, this residence was now empty. This mansion was just as the other party had requested. There were two courtyards in the east and west. At this time, everything in the two courtyards had been moved away, leaving only the empty courtyards and a few rooms. "Since you've seen everything, let's begin." The Empress walked around the courtyard and said, "I will be the witness. Tang Jinya, the Minister of Works, will also be the witness." "Yes," Zhang Junzheng immediately replied. "It's just that the Zhang family's technology has never been divulged to outsiders, so Minister Tang can't always watch from the side. Only Sir Tang can enter." Although he didn't want to offend the Empress, he didn't want the Zhang family's technology to be divulged. As long as the technology was still there, the Zhang family wouldn't decline. As long as the Empress still wanted the products made by the Zhang family, she wouldn't do anything to them. "You are really careful, but—" the Empress said faintly. She then glanced at Ren Baqian and walked out without looking back. "You may begin. I will come back to see the results of the competition after it's over." After the Empress left, Ren Baqian turned to Zhang Junzheng, smiled, and said, "Let's begin. I believe all of you are ready in 1 month." "Of course." Zhang Junjing nodded, turned his head, and whispered a few words to Zhang Heqi. The latter then left. Not long after, carriages covered in black cloth came from the other side of the street and entered the east courtyard. Only one carriage stopped. After opening the cloth, there were 10 jars of wine inside. After opening all of them, Ren Baqian took a whiff and sent half of them back to the courtyard. Sir Ren, the wine will be brewed for the second time, using this as the base. As for the rest, I won't show them to you. Zhang Junzheng cupped his hands. As you wish, Ren Baqian replied faintly. He didn't need to think to know that the carriages were all related to the 3 competitions. He hid them so tightly because he was afraid that Ren Baqian would steal them. Although Zhang Junzheng was cautious enough, he was wrong from the beginning. Ren Baqian really didn't care about his technology. Who had ever seen a billionaire steal money from a beggar's bowl? In this regard, Ren Baqian had sufficient confidence in Earth technology. Furthermore, Zhang Junzheng had indeed placed too much importance on these technologies and the Zhang family. He even dared to say such things in front of the Empress and Tang Xinye. He would rather take the risk of Tang Xinye making things difficult for the Zhang family in the future and firmly hold on to these technologies. He actually dared to do this when the Zhang family was in a bad situation. Did he really think that the Zhang family was indispensable to Dayo, so he was fearless? Sir Run, the time limit is 5 days. Minister Tong, I will take my leave now. Zhang Junzheng cupped his hands at the 2 of them, went to the east courtyard, and closed the door tightly. Oomph. Tang Xinye sneered. The Zhang family only had eyes for Her Majesty. If Qin Chuan was here, he would have drawn his sword and chopped him. Sir Tong, the craftsmen and materials that I want should be here soon. Ren Baqian turned his head and said to Tang Xinye, who was still standing at the same spot. They will be here soon. Sir Run, you only have 5 days. The other party has obviously prepared all kinds of tools. You won't lose now, right? Tang Xinye asked. Take a guess, Sir Tong. Do you want to make a bet? Ren Baqian changed the topic. Seeing that you are full of confidence, I won't argue with you. I'm just saying casually. If Sir Ren loses, it won't look good for Her Majesty. Tang Xinye laughed. He wasn't a fool. He knew more than anyone else about the various things that Ren Baqian came up with. Besides Ren Baqian and the Empress, the person who had the most confidence in Ren Baqian was him. After a while, carts of materials and a team of craftsmen entered the west courtyard. Zhang Heqi even stuck his head out from the top of the wall to take a look. In the end, he saw Ren Baqian looking at him with a smile, so he retracted his head. Ren Baqian strolled into the courtyard, gathered the craftsmen, took out the blueprints, and began to assign tasks. These blueprints were made by professionals. According to the limitations of this era and the time constraints, these production plans were already the best choices. That afternoon, the sounds of assembling items in the Zhang family's courtyard stopped, and thick smoke rose from the courtyard. The next day, the fragrance of wine wafted out from the courtyard, and at the same time, the sound of forging iron could be heard. In the west courtyard where Ren Baqian was, there was still the sound of hammering and sawing wood. Even the tools weren't ready. Fifth uncle, we will definitely win. Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju couldn't help but say as they listened to the sounds in the courtyard next door. At this time, both the east and west courtyards were busy. Although the east courtyard was busy, everything was in order. The craftsmen of the Zhang family worked separately and didn't disturb each other. In the west courtyard, it was a mess. One by one, the craftsmen were working on the blueprints given by Ren Baqian. From time to time, they would come over to ask Ren Baqian a few questions. The waste that was thrown away in the courtyard was almost piled up to the top of the wall. Even Tang Xinye, who came over to take a look, began to have doubts. He couldn't help but ask, Sir Run, why don't we make a bet on whether you will win or lose? Chapter 578. What are we betting on? Ren Baqian asked with a vexed look on his face. He tried his best to look anxious because of the progress. Looking at your expression, I know that you already have a plan in mind and want to deceive me. Tang Xinye didn't buy it at all. He carefully observed Ren Baqian's expression and immediately snorted disdainfully. Rinpoche looked at Tong Jingye with a headache, who said that the aboriginals were honest boys. This old man only looked honest and straightforward. Do you want me to scout out the enemy for you? Tong Jingye laughed. If Sir Tong has nothing better to do, Rinpoche replied noncommittally. Haha, I'm just saying. I have confidence in Sir Run. If I go, they will look down on Sir Run. Tong Jingye laughed it off. This time, Rinpoche was really itching. Was this old man here to tease him today? Rinpoche was even more convinced when he saw Tong Jingye walk out with his hands clasped behind his back, humming a mountain tune as he walked. Rinpoche pondered for a long time, but couldn't figure out how he had provoked Tong Jingye recently. Since he couldn't think of anything, he decided not to think about it. Rinpoche strolled back to the house, took out a few bundles of different thicknesses, and threw them to the blacksmiths. The blacksmiths were extremely surprised after trying the spring steel wire that Rinpoche took out. Even though they hadn't come into contact with modern alloys, they could tell that the steel wire that Rinpoche gave them was completely different from anything they had seen before. After wrapping the steel wire around the arm a few times and loosening it, the steel wire actually bounced perfectly straight and wasn't out of shape like ordinary steel. Not to mention the fact that there was no irregularity in these steel wires at all. They were of the same thickness from the beginning to the end, but there were no signs of hammering. This made the blacksmiths feel as if these steel wires were made by nature and not by human hands. Not long after, the sound of hammering could be heard in the courtyard. However, a new problem quickly emerged. This steel wire would become brittle or have other problems after being heated and hammered. Although they might find a solution if given some time, time was what they lacked the most at the moment. It's okay. I'm just letting you try it out. Rinpoche waved his hand and smiled in response to the blacksmith's doubts. He had already known about this before. This was a special kind of carbon spring steel wire, which was very difficult to process in this era. After secondary processing, it was easy to change the free gas and carbon content in the steel wire, and at the same time, change the performance of the steel wire in all aspects. What he had brought was just a cover-up. After hearing his words, the blacksmiths excitedly carried the coils of steel wire back to do various experiments, and soon discovered new uses for these steel wires. For example, weaving them into whips, and a single whip could take away half a life. In this regard, he could only say that he had really underestimated the extent of the Aboriginals' obsession with weapons. No matter what it was in their hands, they would quickly discover that it could be used to attack others. Even if it was just a steel wire, it could still be used to whip people. Out of the 3 items in the bed, one of them was dyeing, which went very smoothly. Dayo simply didn't have the technology to make textiles. Similarly, they didn't have the technology to dye cloth. Therefore, they could only find a few quick-witted craftsmen from the Ministry of Works. The dyes were all kinds of direct dyes that Rinpoche brought back. Not only were there all kinds of colors, red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple, but each color was also divided into 3 types. For example, yellow was light yellow, lemon yellow, and golden yellow. Red was bright red, peach red. If it weren't for the limited amount of things he could bring back, he would have brought back 30 colors of each item. When the time came, he could make 210 colors, and he was sure that the Zhang family would start to doubt their own existence. As for the cloth, it was cotton cloth brought back from Earth. Each piece was 7 feet wide and 10 feet long. Finally, there was the color fixing agent. The color of the dye that Rinpoche brought was bright, and the only drawback was that it would easily fade after contact with water. In fact, this was the case with most dyes. Although Rinpoche didn't know what methods the other party used to reduce the fading, he assumed that it was some old-fashioned method. Even if it reduced the fading, it would only be to a certain extent. The color-fixing agent was completely different. The epoxy group in the color-fixing agent and certain groups in the fiber dye molecules formed a covalent bond to achieve the effect of stabilizing the dye. First, the cotton cloth was directly soaked in the dye, dyed and dried. Depending on the situation, it was decided whether to dye it again. Then, it was soaked in the color-fixing agent liquid at a certain temperature for 15 minutes before drying. What these craftsmen needed to do was very simple, and they were all done in 3 days. In fact, this time, Rinpoche was actually busy with brewing wine, which Zhang Junzheng didn't care about the least. What he had been doing in the courtyard was distillation. Rinpoche had long wanted to brew wine. One had to know that it was unknown whether it was due to the special environment in this world or that this world was filled with some kind of substance that was different from Earth. Not only did the meat taste delicious, but it also contained energy that could replenish the body. The taste of fruits and grains were also extremely fragrant and sweet. If he used the same method to brew wine, it would be much better than the wine on Earth. If it wasn't for the fact that the brewing technology in this world was still a little backward, the Empress wouldn't have to carry sorghum liquor every day. After using 3 days, Rinpoche finally created a pot-type distilling boiler. At this time, the fragrance of the wine in the courtyard next door had already started to dissipate. It seemed that their wine had already been brewed. Instead, the sound of forging iron rang out continuously every day. On the 4th day, the courtyard where Rinpoche and the others were at began to emit a strong fragrance of wine. The fragrance was so strong that it made people salivate just by smelling it from outside. The first to discover it was Zhang Heqi and the others in the courtyard next door. Soon after, Zhang Junzheng, who had received an urgent report, ran out drowsily. Upon smelling the fragrance of the wine, Zhang Junzheng's expression changed. What a strong fragrance! One could tell the progress of Rinpoche's brewing just by looking at his nose. This was the first time that the fragrance of wine had come out of Rinpoche's courtyard, and it was actually so strong. It was almost as strong as the Zhang family's wine, which had been processed 3 times. Although it wasn't as strong as the Zhang family's wine, Zhang Junzheng was already a little worried. After standing in the courtyard for a while, Zhang Junzheng glanced at the people around him and said in a deep voice, "Go do your own things. This wine is slightly inferior to our Zhang family's wine. Even if we lose this round, it won't affect the overall situation. All you have to do is do your own things." After hearing Zhang Junzheng's words, the people who were attracted by the fragrance of the wine dispersed. As for the taste of the wine, Zhang Junzheng wasn't surprised. The wine that Zhang Junzheng used for the competition was definitely the best in order to impress the Empress. Chapter 579. Rinpoche, who was in the courtyard, was a little surprised. The aroma of this wine was mellow and had a hint of fruity aroma. One had to know that the base wine was provided by Zhang Junzheng, so it should have been made by the Zhang family. Rinpoche had been focusing on increasing the intensity of the wine and didn't pay much attention to the original base wine. However, this aroma made him realize that the Zhang family was indeed skilled in brewing wine. If they were to compete in brewing wine, he might not be able to produce wine that was better than theirs in a short period of time. After all, there were many factors that affected the taste of wine. For example, the 1982 law fight was so famous because the grapes ripened almost perfectly that year. As a result, the ingredients used to brew wine here were different from those on Earth. He definitely had to experiment more to brew a wine that tasted better. Unfortunately, they were competing in the intensity of the wine. Such is life. Rinpoche thought about the Zhang family and felt that they were indeed a little unlucky. If they hadn't met him, they would probably have had the opportunity to show off their skills. However, this was also good as they would be able to display their greatest value in his hands. Rinpoche conveniently gave himself a thumbs up for his wisdom and bravery. He scooped some wine from the jar outside the distilling boiler and drank it. It tasted fragrant, mellow, soft, and lingered in the mouth. It was indeed a good wine, better than all the wines he had drunk before. As for the alcohol content, it was about 35%. After distilling 5 jars of wine, he obtained about 2.5 jars of wine with 35% alcohol. Rinpoche then distilled it again and obtained 1.5 jars of wine with 50% alcohol. At this time, the wine was like a raging fire when it entered the stomach, but the aroma was even more intense and tempting. After the fourth distillation, the aroma of the wine completely changed. Although it still had the original aroma after careful analysis, it gave off a completely different feeling. There were a few more flavors, as if it had become a completely different wine. At this time, the aroma of the wine had spread throughout the entire courtyard and could be smelled from half the street. Moreover, smelling this aroma made one feel like they were half drunk. A group of people had gathered outside the courtyard and were smelling the aroma with covetous looks on their faces. Even Zhang Junzheng, who was in the courtyard next door, was shocked when he smelled this aroma. This aroma should be very familiar, but it felt very strange to him. It was as if it was a different kind of wine from the past, one on the ground and the other in the sky. How did the other party do it? What did he add to the wine? In fact, what Rinpoche was doing was just distillation. However, after the fourth distillation of the wine reached 65 degrees Celsius, some unknown changes occurred, and the aroma of the wine suddenly increased by a large margin. A few aromas that weren't easy to discover were completely highlighted and became an intoxicating aroma. Such fragrant wine! A coarse voice rang out in the courtyard. Qin Chuan had somehow arrived here by following the smell, and he grabbed the jug of wine with one hand. The wine belongs to Her Majesty. Rinpoche was shocked. This was to be used for the competition. After the competition, everything would be fine. But now, he couldn't let anyone drink it. Give me some. In the future, I'll be in danger. If you want to teach Tong Jingye a lesson, I won't hesitate to do so. Qin Chuan's eyes were glued to the wine jar in his hand. Who are you talking about, old man? Tong Jingye's gloomy voice resounded in the courtyard almost immediately. At the same time, he struck Qin Chuan's back with the black tiger steals the heart. The moment Qin Chuan turned around, Tong Jingye's hand reached out to grab the wine jar. Old man, I'm talking about you. Qin Chuan was furious. Tong Jingye laughed mischievously. His black tiger steals the heart was blocked by Qin Chuan, and he took advantage of the situation to execute an extremely fast groin kick. Both of you get lost. The Empress's angry voice resounded in the air, following which a figure in red descended from the sky and grabbed the wine jar with one hand. Taking advantage of the situation, she kicked the two of them away. Two human-shaped holes immediately appeared on the wall of the courtyard. Your Majesty, why are you here? Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Your smell is too strong. Those two bastards have been loitering around here for a long time. Rinpoche understood the Empress's words as soon as he heard it. The fragrance of the wine must have spread out during the distillation process and been smelled by others. Even he was surprised by the fragrance of the wine, let alone others. Then, someone spread the news to the two of them, and they came here to stare at the wine jar, ready to snatch it. These two old bastards were willing to throw away their pride just for a mouthful of wine. It was possible that these two weren't the only ones. It was just that the others couldn't compete with them, so they didn't show up when they saw them. It was a pity that the Empress appeared out of nowhere and gave each of them a kick. The Empress held the wine jar in one hand and raised her head to gulp it down. She felt that the fragrance of the wine was tempting, following which a ball of fire rose in her stomach, and her face began to turn red. What a fragrant wine! What a strong wine! The Empress exclaimed in surprise. She raised her head to the sky and gulped down another mouthful. After two mouthfuls, almost half of the wine jar was gone. Your Majesty, drink slowly. This wine is strong, and you have to save some for the competition, Rinpoche quickly said. I know, but this wine is so fragrant. The Empress exhaled, and a strong fragrance of the wine sprayed from her mouth onto Rinpoche's face. After gulping down half of the wine jar, her face turned red from ear to ear, and her voice was lazy and alluring. She looked down at the wine jar and then at Rinpoche. She chuckled and took another sip. Her eyes began to become hazy. Your Majesty, wait for me to take another sip. The Empress felt the rich sweetness in her mouth. She liked it and gulped down another mouthful of wine. This time, she took a smaller sip, but her eyes became even more hazy. Your Majesty, you really can't drink anymore. Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He knew that the Empress loved wine, but he didn't expect the wine jar to be so tempting. She hugged it tightly and didn't want to let go. It seemed like he really had to get the recipe for the Zhang family's wine. I know. I'll take another sip. The Empress gulped down another mouthful of wine. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the wine jar was gone. The Empress's drunkenness became more obvious. Even though the Empress had a good capacity for alcohol, this jar contained about 5 caddies of wine. She drank more than half of it in a few mouthfuls, and her drunkenness became obvious. Your Majesty, you really can't drink anymore. Rinpoche was helpless. The Empress was already drunk, and if he allowed her to continue drinking, he was afraid that the wine jar would be empty. He had no choice but to reach out to grab the wine jar. When the Empress saw him reach out, she lifted the wine jar, and Rinpoche pounced on empty air. He pounced directly in front of the Empress, and the distance between them was only 1 foot. Rinpoche saw that the Empress's face was pink, her eyes were hazy, and she looked charmingly naive while holding the wine jar. He couldn't help but feel a fire burning in his heart as he leaned forward and kissed her. Then he was bitten on the lips by the Empress. Ouch, 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 ouch. Rinpoche was in so much pain that his tears were about to fall. Good for nothing. The Empress rolled her eyes at him coquettishly. She took a step back and drank another mouthful of wine. Only then did she throw the wine jar back to him. She let out a few seductive giggles and jumped into the air in a flash. She almost stumbled and fell from the sky. After a few flashes, she disappeared. When the Empress left, Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan, who were hiding somewhere, appeared in front of Rinpoche again. This is all for the competition. Please don't think about it anymore, Rinpoche said helplessly as he hugged the wine jar. In fact, this wine was distilled and had a higher alcohol content than the Zhang family's wine. Why were they behaving like lechers who had seen a peerless beauty? Tong Jinye, Qin Chuan, the two of you come into the palace. The Empress's voice traveled for an unknown distance and reached the hands of a few people in the courtyard. The two of them grimaced in pain and looked at the wine jar in Rinpoche's hand, which was still emitting a strong aroma of wine. Soon after, they disappeared from the courtyard in a flash. Rinpoche waited for the two of them to leave before he carefully took a sip of the wine. At first, he felt that his mouth was full of mellow fragrance and sweetness. Soon after, he felt as if his throat and stomach had been set on fire. After the extreme heat, it turned into a trace of cool air that soothed his throat that had just been set on fire. He couldn't help but moan at the peculiar comfort. No wonder the Empress hugged this wine jar and didn't let go. It was indeed good wine. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.